what exactly is ribcage compression? Is it that important, and who should be worrying about it? Welcome back to another episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding. I believe this is our 50th episode here, which is pretty cool because I think today will probably be one of the most important episodes, I think, with what we're going to be covering here. It's something that you don't see a lot of people talk about. And I am joined today with Mr. Jonathan Warren himself. How you doing, John?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Have you seen what's been going on in regards to the whole ribcage compression thing on TikTok primarily?
I'm not on TikTok, so it's like I'm so old school, right? I don't really do much on IG, just YouTube pretty much. But I've gotten tagged in a couple things. Somebody sent me a couple things that people were posting on there. I see I get reposted over there a few times, and then people tag me on your thing. But somebody commented on my YouTube. They're like, "It's trending," and like you're the OG of it. So I don't know exactly what's going on, but I've seen some rib talk lately.
Okay, well, we're going to get into all that. Before we do, I guess a good way to start this off is tell us about yourself. For those of you, those people watching who don't know who you are, who are you, Jonathan? How did you even get into this whole space, the whole ribcage thing? Where are you from? What do you do?
Well, even the people that do watch my stuff, they don't know a lot about me. Even I don't really talk a whole bunch about myself. So this will be kind of the first. Like I did a couple things before I started like doing social media, but this will be like the first time actually talking about myself, which I hate doing. So you're gonna have to get it out of me. But
now's the time.
So I just I've been doing the whole personal training thing since I was 19. So that was back in 2006 when I started, and I was graduating with a finance degree. I was going through school. Personal training was a lot different then. It wasn't really like something you thought you could do and make a good living at, like as an adult. It was kind of like a young kid thing. You do it as a transitionary kind of job. So I was planning on going into the world of finance, and I ended up graduating in 2008 when the world of finance was just total shit. I mean, that was a little, you don't really remember probably what it was like then as far as like the finance,
the housing crash.
Yeah, everything. So it just, I was applying for jobs that, people with 20 years of experience were applying for. And I was like, you know what? These are like low paying jobs. I'm already making more money training. Like, I'm just going to keep doing this and see where it goes. So I decided to keep rolling with that. I was lucky to be with a couple really good trainers at a gym. We left and they opened their own gym. It was a husband and wife. She was a physical therapist and he was a trainer. So that's what really got me interested on the more, you can see like kind of the physical therapy side of things. And around then I kind of started piecing together the pieces of how to get things on the table to translate to the weight room. So I do a lot of massage therapy. I was a MAT specialist. I'm sorry, not MAT. I was doing trigger point therapy. And
MAT is that like specific
the muscle activation techniques. We did a lot of that. I never got formally trained in that, but she was, and she did a lot of stuff. But I did the NAMTPT, which is trigger point therapy. So I was a PT aide and a trainer. And that was fun. That was good. But I was in Lubbock, Texas. And I was like, I got to get the fuck out of here if I'm doing this for a living. Mm-hmm. And my best friend was living in SoCal. And they wanted me to move out there. And I came out there. I was like, oh, this is it. This is where people actually care about their health and fitness. This is where you got to be. So came out to Southern Cal, did a lot of things in the corporate gym industry, and ended up going back out on my own and eventually getting down to Newport Beach where I am now and kind of settled in here.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I just was. It's actually, that's probably the nicest place I think I've been in this country. It's amazing over there.
Yeah, I wouldn't live anywhere else. This was, I grew up watching the OC. I was like 16 years old watching the OC, and I was like, dude, I'm going to open a gym in Newport Beach one day. And I ended up doing that. That was pretty cool. My goal has always been to get out here.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I've been to San Diego a bunch of times. I've been to LA a bunch of times, and I was like, San Diego's the nicest place. I never really stopped in between there, and I was like, LA's a shithole. But you grew up in New York, and you see like this glamorized version of California, and that's the OC. And then I went to the OC. I was like, holy shit, this is where it is. This is the Cali life.
And people are a little less crazy out here than in LA. San Diego's pretty chill. I like San Diego a lot. LA is a little different scene for me.
Yeah, LA's dirty. But how did you get into this whole rib cage thing, the whole PRI techniques? How did you transfer? Because I was saying you were a bodybuilder first, and did you notice that you started having your own issues? Was this something you just sought out and pursued? How did you really get down this rabbit hole to begin with?
So one of my first mentors, she was a disciple of Shirley Sarman. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She is the OG of physical therapy, one of the most respected people out there. She's put out just so much stuff, and she had a lot of articles and books on musculoskeletal imbalances. Impairment syndromes was the word she used, and musculoskeletal impairment syndromes is the book, I think. And that really kind of like opened up my eyes, because I was seeing people all the time, of a wide variety of people, and you see the same issues, different issues, but similar ones with different people. And sometimes it's a totally different issue, but then you see that with a lot of other people. So you recognize these patterns, but you don't really, put together the root cause of it. And if you don't really know the root cause, it's hard to actually like fix it. So Shirley Starman kind of identified a lot of these. It really helped a lot, just kind of seeing, like, understanding that there's a very commonalities between everybody. We're all unique, but we're not that unique. We're all managing gravity. We're all dealing with the internal forces similarly. And so that really first got me started on the whole PT route. And then I continued to go down that route and got into some other modalities like DNS and FRC, which are all great. But I always felt like there was just something still missing. I didn't have like a whole picture, because sometimes I could make the change I wanted, and it wouldn't stick. And other times I just couldn't quite get the change to happen at all. And I started noticing certain things like in FRC. Are you familiar with FRC?
I know the term FRC. I don't know exactly what it is. I think I've done like FRC concepts, but what exactly is that?
It's just it stands for functional range conditioning.
Okay.
Essentially,
Like
it's
car, is
like
that like cars and stuff?
cars and then joint mobility, and they really segment everything out, which there's some value to that at times, but they don't really look at how things move together. And I would notice, like, okay, I'm trying to get this internal rotation of this tibia, but not just happening. But wait a minute, I got the hip to go to internal rotation. Now the tibia just automatically did. Like, what's going on? And so I had a trainer that worked for me, and he was into the kind of PRI world, and he introduced it to me. And then from there, like, he was somebody who was kind of like very fringe. He wasn't a very good practitioner at all. So it's not like I learned a lot from it. Then I set me down that rabbit hole, because everything started to make sense, especially for myself, because like I got diagnosed with some scoliosis when I was younger, and I've always had pretty big asymmetry issues. I had a lot of lateral left knee pain. I had an injury in football, and it just always fucking hurt. Anytime I ran, I could not run. It typically wouldn't be so bad that I couldn't like lift weights. It was fine. But anytime I put an impact on running, just after a few steps, it would hurt. And then every now and then it wouldn't. And I would try to run when that wouldn't happen, because I used to really like running. And
Mhm.
as soon as I got into PRI, the first course I took was the Myokin, which is like the lower limb course, which, if anyone's interested, I mean, I don't necessarily recommend PRI for everybody, but if you're interested, Myokin is a great way to start, because it's like muscles you understand and know. It's like your leg muscles. Some of the other stuff gets kind of deep when you get into the pelvis stuff, but I kind of started piecing together some things that just totally made sense for me. And after doing like this, really, like, you kind of know, getting my hip to shift and getting some internal rotation on my left side through a couple of non-manual techniques, that pain that I've been dealing with for 15 years completely gone. And I could run, and I could do anything I needed. And it was just a positional issue. And what I realized is, a lot of the chronic issues that people have, if it's like chronic, obviously there's acute issues that are a little different. But if someone's got a shitty shoulder that's always shitty, or a knee that's always shitty, or a back, it's a positional issue, and that can be fixed, and that can actually bring a lot of value if you're a trainer. That's one of the reasons why I'm able to like charge a pretty good rate, is I can help people that have had issues for years that they've just accepted as a way of life, like a lot of bodybuilders do. And you can fix that, and you can just go on. Like, you don't have to sit there and deal with it. You can just do one little change, and it's gone. So that's really sucked me in. And I probably fell into the trap that a lot of people do in PRI or FRC, whatever you get into, is you got to go really deep to know how deep you got to go, in a sense. And so I probably got a little neurotic, and that's what I keep telling you not to get to, because it is easy, especially when you see good changes, and it's easy to get kind of OCD. Most of us bodybuilders are already a little OCD, and it's
Yeah.
not every pain issue is going to be fixed by using PRI techniques. Like, you can do other stuff. I mean, I think PRI would fix it, but some things, it's like the only way to fix it. And when I'm saying PRI, also, I'm just talking about the whole expansion compression model as a whole. I know, Bill Hartman. He was a part of PRI, and he kind of branched off. He's a little bit more on the performance side of things. So a lot of people who are into PRI, Pat Davidson, Zach Couples, and stuff, they kind of went along with Bill Hartman a little bit more. So I still like use PRI and use the terminology, but overall, I would say I'm more of like an expansion compression model kind of guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that, the whole expansion and compression concept, because this is what had happened. I guess there was a kid who made some talking points on the whole idea of rib compression, I guess, a few months ago, which I hadn't seen and had brought some attention to the topic. And then I started seeing a lot of people talk about it on TikTok. And the thing about TikTok is what happens with information on there is it's just a bunch of kids who like hear something and then they like take something completely out of context and just regurgitate it everywhere, and like you see on every single video like, oh my god, holy rib cage compression over and over, and like nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. So I made a video, and I made a couple of videos, and they're all been getting a decent amount of views. I think one has like over 300,000 at this point, and all these kids are now taking the whole idea again, and they're saying I think they think rib cage compression is just something that only pertains to if you're orienting your rib cage when you're like benching or something, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're compressing your rib cage. So obviously that's not the case. So let's really define that. What exactly is rib cage compression? Is it that important, and who should be worrying about it?
You're just lucky. I happen to have my little guy with me. All right.
There we go.
So, if you're somebody who works out all the time, you're producing high force, and you're going to get compressive force with that. That's has to happen. I mean, we can't. Well, it might be useful too to define like the relative motion versus orientation as well as we're going
Okay.
into this, right? So that's something you hear me talk a lot about a lot of my videos. Relative motion is going to be where things are moving kind of interdependently with each other. So they're depending on each other, but they're not moving like chunked together as a whole. And in general, like for bodybuilding, relative motion is going to help you isolate certain muscles a little bit more. Whereas, like if you're powerlifter, you want to use a lot of orientation techniques, which is going to kind of piece together things to work as a unit. You're going to get a lot more connective tissue. You're going to get a lot more force transfer through your tendons. And that's a good thing for athletics. Like you don't want relative motion. Like you can't make a cut with relative motion. But as bodybuilders, we're not really doing anything fucking athletic in the
Yeah.
gym for the most part.
Let's give examples of that just to put it into perspective. What would be an example of relative motion versus orientation?
So I always like squats a really good example, right? You can see someone who's got a really pronounced butt wink. Now, if we're talking like really pronounced, where the lumbar just reverses and it really drops under, that's a pretty big orientation of the lumbar spine and the pelvis coming under. Whereas you can see someone who's got great mobility, like I did a podcast with Range of Strength, who's really great at mobility, and I always use him as an example of someone who squats ass to grass without a lot of orientation with relative motion, and you can just see everything's different. The center of mass doesn't really get shifted around. The butt wink is so minimal because it's a relative motion. It's the counter nutation that's happening at the bottom. Sorry, I know that's probably like foreign language, but you do tuck very slightly under at the bottom of a squat if you're using the relative motion, but it's not that grossly exaggerated butt wink where it's all going through one or two hinge points. So basically, it's really easy to see, like, does something look ugly? Is somebody doing a lunge and their hips are going out to the side and they just look all shitty? Or do they look pretty when they're working out? In general, if you look pretty when you're working out, you're going to be using relative motion. A real common one is like the rows, right? If I'm just rowing, getting that natural glenohumeral extension versus orienting just to close the distance, that's another common orientation. And then obviously with like the bench press, which seems to be the big one, is people a lot of times they set up like in an orientation to get more stability. And depending on their setup, sometimes you see people actually orient through there, but it seems to be more of an issue of just over orienting at the start on the bench press. But those are some of the more common examples, but you can see it on anything. And you do produce more force with orientation. Again, that force is dissipated over a lot more areas, and you can use that actually to your advantage. You can think about your traps, right? Like there used to be the whole concept, like a lot of women especially would think, well, if I start lifting weights, I'm just going to get big traps. And a lot of that is because people use their traps inadvertently on everything because they're orienting that shoulder girdle for, pull downs, any rows. So if you want big traps, you can use some orientation techniques. Potentially, there might be some ramifications you just got to take care of like after your workout, but you can use orientation to build muscle. You just got to know that there's a cost to it. The other one would be like, I've been doing like the triceps, like really kind of letting the shoulder girdle kind of come forward and having the long head help, or on a decline setup, you can kind of orient the rib cage in a way that actually produces a lot of force on your sternal fibers. So it's not that like all orientation is terrible. It's just you want to be aware of what your body's doing and is it like benefiting you and is there a cost to it?
Hmm. Okay, so now with all of that taken into consideration, how does that necessarily apply to the whole compressive and expansion?
So yeah, when we're orienting, there's going to be a lot of compressive forces. So let's just take like the bench press for example, because that seems to be the big one. So If I'm using like relative motion and I'm keeping a pretty expanded rib cage position, again, there's a level of compression that's unavoidable. We want that. But a lot of people, they just start to really squish front to back, especially bodybuilders. And then when you do that, like again, you're taking tension off of your pecs, which again, that seems to be the big thing everyone thinks about is the rib cage with the pecs, but it also has a huge impact on your lats. It also, like when you get squished like this, is also going to laterally orient your humerus, and this is going to like make it so things don't line up right. You don't get a lot of lines of tension. You start seeing wonky things like elbows that kind of turn out. You don't get good pronation or supination, and a lot of that is it's just getting affected by the axial skeleton and the pelvis. It affects everything peripherally. So if you're
Mhm.
squished everywhere, you might be thinking, okay, that's not going to have an impact on my curls, but it actually is. A lot of times I see people
Yeah.
squish and they can't line up their elbows when they're curling. They can't get good lines of tension, and I didn't know what was going on when I was young. I would have like one side that would be good and one side that wouldn't. I'd try to do a few things, and that's because like most bodybuilders are going to get squished front to back, but some of us who are a little bit more aware of core, we just lift a certain way. We're more asymmetric. We might have a really asymmetrical compression where it's like the front on the right and the back on the left is real common. So
Yeah.
anytime you're dealing with excessive compression, it's going to limit your movement options. And that tends to be what you see a lot with bodybuilders, right? They're like, I can only do this one machine with this handle. If I switch to that, like fucks up my shoulder. And then eventually you're going to run out of options completely. And also a lot of people tend to like tailor down volume or intensity because, oh, I'm worried about like, hurting myself. But when you have like a good rib cage, a good pelvis, you can really push yourself pretty much like absolute failure because you're not doing damage on anything. You're not in like a funky position. You're lined up with everything.
Yeah. Yeah. You made that point about the biceps, which is funny because that applies to me. Like like you already know I'm compressed here. Um, it annoys me, and this is kind of why I'm neurotic too, is because I had these theories for so long of like trying to piece things together. And when you like you don't know where to look, it's like you're just like looking at all this information. It's like I know about the scoliosis. It's like, is that affecting this? Is that affecting this? And I know, okay, my brachialis is more developed here. I have more pronation here, less supination. This bicep peaks higher. And then you go and tell a physiotherapist, and they're like, oh no, that's just your genetics. You're overthinking. And it's like, no, I'm really fucking not. Like everything that I had theorized was correct. My hips are shifted. That's why this erector is more developed. It's not just because the spine is curved. It's because of like everything that has been affected as a byproduct. And so now it's just like when after going through all of that, it's hard to not be neurotic about everything.
Yeah.
But
I understand entirely, and you only know what you know, right? So it's like it's not that these physical therapists are like stupid, or they just a lot of people just haven't been exposed to this. Unfortunately, it's like Bill Hartman, who's kind of like the goat with all this. He's not trying to get known. It's people that spout his stuff, the Connor Harris and the Zach Couples and stuff that kind of bring the notoriety. But like you only know what you know, and like, a lot of times I think people think that makes someone like stupid or less like likely to be able to grasp certain concepts, but a lot of people, once they get introduced to this, they start to piece together things like you said that they've been thinking about. Like, oh, that makes sense about like why that was doing that. Like if you look at the pelvis, right? As your pelvis, if you're like us and we get really crooked on one side, do I have a pelvis? I think I do. Hold on. Sorry, one second. That might help. Yeah. Oh shit. Okay. Right. So like a real common imbalance you see on bodybuilders is their legs, right? You usually see super overdeveloped right adductor. That's pretty universal. Like, and that's because that right adductor is in such a position. So we're all going to have a little rightward orientation, right? If you're really compressed and you're really producing a lot of force, you do come out of it a little bit, but there is always some degree. And for you and me, it's like a pretty big degree. So when I'm here and rotated into this side, that just lines things up for this adductor to take over a lot of force. I'm going to be way more comfortable on this foot. That adductor has a big role in keeping you on that side. This ilium will kind of rotate out. That makes the femur rotate out. Now, a lot of times you see like a really big vastus lateralis on people's left legs. Not universal. Everyone's got different compensations, but you might see a bodybuilder who's got way more developed left vastus lateralis, like Jay Cutler. I mean, there's a ton of them. And then on the right side is just all adductor, and that's because they're loading. Like they think they're squatting normal, but they're off centered while they're doing that, even though they're looking for their pelvis off to the side. So you're getting totally different development at like a best case scenario. Worst case is you're really starting to kind of overly fatigue and damage some structures.
yeah. So as this has been going around, you get two sides: people who are very intrigued by it, and I've pointed a lot of people in your direction, in Connor Harris, Zach Couples, and I mean, I've already gotten dozens of messages of people saying that, just by going through this stuff, like I had one guy this morning that was like, I had TOS for the past 3 years. And after doing these practices for the past 4 days, like my pain has been gone instantly, which is fucking crazy to think about. But then you have other people who are like, none of this stuff matters. Just lift with good form. And that's not the answer, right? Because if you have these pre-existing conditions, what good form is really not good form. Like you have to address the underlying issues. And what do you think really is the primary issue? Is it people who already have these pre-existing structural problems, or is it the lifting with poor technique that leads to the structural problems?
It's almost like your structure is going to dictate how your shitty technique is, more or less. So, I mean, you can't avoid the compression just by having weights on you, but you can be aware of like where you're keeping the tension. So I would say like there are certain structures that are going to have to be more aware, especially if you're a really wide kind of person and you get that really, really big flare. And if you're the kind of person who just lifted like a power lifter because that's what you were taught, like you're putting the stress on your body and you're compressing in a way that is going to change the shape. And it changes the shape of your bones too. Like your axial skeleton changes, even like your humerus head and your femoral head, like where they go into the sockets, that starts to get curved. Like these are big changes that happen just because you're producing force that way. In general, like if you work out with a stack, which is how I was taught. Like when I first started working out, I wasn't taught to get this huge big arch until I went to until I went to powerlifting, and I did that for powerlifting. But anytime I was in the gym, I knew to keep a stack just because I felt like better activation. And so since I did that my whole life, I've got a really good developed chest, and I haven't really had any of the upper body issues that a lot of people have. So yeah, you can work out with good technique and keep yourself from like fucking yourself up, but if you need more space to access, there's really no way to increase the space by doing anything other than what I talk about, getting your body to expand from the inside out. You can't stretch your way to it. You can't do a certain exercise necessarily that's going to open up that space. There are some really specific ways you can do it, but it's still kind of like a corrective modality. And so I think it's something that everyone should be aware of, especially if you are the super high intensity going for super like more lower volume heavy weights, because you're going to end up using more compressive forces. And it's not just about, okay, well, because like I get messages all the time like, oh, my shoulders, they feel so much better. Like that's great. Your shoulders going to feel better. Your back's going to feel better, but you're also going to develop a lot different way. Like there's a very specific look to somebody who's crazy compressed. Like you can look at some of the powerlifters who have competed in bodybuilding, like a Stan Efferdine, or you can look at your buddy Paul Carter, like the way he presses when he had a powerlifting background. It's a very specific look, and it's not 3D. It's not really detailed in the pecs, in the like lateral delts, or in the lats. Essentially, I mean, you can build up some good arms. You can build up a thick back, but a lot of times you see these guys who are super compressed up top. They're missing that aesthetic, and people don't understand that there is a trade-off when we're putting tension on the structures. It's not here. They also don't understand like a real stretch. Like if I'm doing this, that's not the same thing as actually letting that humerus go and getting that stretch with a stacked rib cage. Coming into here, like preloading it, you're missing the whole thing. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much what I've been known for is people can feel their pecs and they connect to them a lot better.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's again the feedback that I've gotten from every client that I've put told to implement these techniques, and just from putting out these videos, everybody's like, oh my god, I can feel my chest so much better. And then you have the camp of people who say, oh, feeling doesn't matter. And then I've also consistently tried to theorize why these guys from the golden era look the way they did, and that it's not just genetics, and that there has to be something more to it. And for a while, I thought it was like, oh, okay, you saw a lot of these guys like Arnold, they bench super wide, but then you figure out like Arnold had this super fucking wide rib cage, which I've come to now realize like I guess a lot of those guys can get away with some things more easily than guys who are a bit more narrow. But for the majority of guys, you realize like they trained with that stack. They would do like those fucking little half reps, and all those guys that train like that for the most part had really good developed detailed striated chests. And you saw that kind of trend away. It's almost like, I mean, guys still have it in bodybuilding, but it seems like the ratio of competitors that have it versus don't is something happened along the way where these techniques that used to be implemented in training, specifically when it comes, I think, back training and chest training, have gone out the window, and that has directly reflected the physique development that we see in these guys. And it's not just a genetic thing, it's the way that they're stacked and executing these movements. And I think it's you and Zach Couples, I think, said this on a podcast where people just look at the body from a 2-dimensional plane and how can I, bias these lower iliac fibers or my clavicular fibers, but don't think about how all of this inside is impacting that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest thing is we might have heard us talk about the dead guy anatomy. That's something that Bill Harmon talks a lot about. It's not just pulleys and levers. The axial skeleton really impacts that. And when you're talking about just being able to train to like not having to worry about this stuff if you train correctly, it's like if you're pushing yourself hard, I don't save reps in reserve. I mean, unless it's like a squat or something like I'm at failure or very close to failure on everything. When you're pushing that hard, you're not going to stop shit from happening. You can stop like bad shit from happening. We're not going to injure yourself. But every time I do, like if I do a shoulder day or a back day, especially if I'm doing a real vertical, if I go behind the head, press or pull, as soon as I'm done, I'll look at myself in the mirror. I'm shifted a little bit, even though I was perfect before that. You can't prevent it. It's going to happen. So no matter what, if you don't address it, and some people it doesn't take much to address at all. Like for me, I have 2 moves I'll do at this point, and it takes me 2 minutes at the beginning, 2 minutes at the end. And that's not how it was in the beginning at all. It took me a lot longer, but it's not this huge, like futile waste of time because you're going to connect with your body so much better. A lot of people who write off the whole mind muscle connection, I've never seen somebody that I would consider like not compressed or having really good form saying that. It's always somebody who's got kind of dog shit form or they're super compressed everywhere. So a lot of what I do is reposition very specifically based off of, you have to feel that specific muscle. You got to feel that anterior glute med. You need to feel that ipsicollar adductor. If you don't feel that, I'm not getting the change I want. So I know my muscle connection means a lot because somebody tells me, oh, I feel this outer glute instead of the inner thigh. I know I'm not getting the position change I want. I've got to have you connect with that right muscle. So I'm really big on the mind muscle as well. And I'm sorry, I started rambling. What was your original question? I was going off about the
I think
training.
I don't even think it was a question. I think it was a statement. It was just how you guys
Oh,
I was like, how people look at the body from a 2-dimensional perspective and they just think, oh, okay, bias my clavicular fiber just by pointing up and, or I could, get my iliac fibers by coming down in this direction or more of the fucking, rhomboids, whatever, but they don't think about this, right? So they'll orient and they'll compress and then they're arching and it changes what you actually get out of that movement. It's not just drawing a line from point A to point B and going in that fashion, even if you're not trying to do it in a powerlifting sense, you're trying to execute real good. Like how you're oriented here completely impacts that.
Oh yeah, like I mean that's the biggest thing is you're going to miss all your sternal fibers. I mean you can potentially get some clavicular activation, but exactly like if we're not if we're not like trying to keep that stack as we're pressing, you're missing the vast majority. And I mean, I've gotten so much feedback for that. I never thought that's what I would be like known for because, like I said, it was just intuitive with me. But people are like, I feel my pecs for the first time ever. I'm like, first time ever? Like that would be so miserable to never get your pecs sore and never to feel that. And then the lats are a big one, right? If we're really compressed and our ribs can't make that round shape, we don't get that length and stretch. So a lot of people just are spamming certain exercises for their lats, but they're not really getting it at all. They're still ending up using a lot of the retraction muscles, or they're just pulling with something different. But the lats, the pecs, and the side delts, I'd say, are the most effective, and also probably the sweep. You see a lot of people who have really developed adductors, but it's rare to see that sweep on people, unless obviously there's some genetic freaks out there. But a lot of that is because they're in a position where they can't actually produce internal rotation force into the ground anymore. They're so ER'd out that that's going to get more adductors, more glutes, more of these lateral tissues instead of those quads. So it really carries over to everything, and it's something that you want to be like aware of. But you can't get super over neurotic. Really, the easiest thing if you want to like, how can I train in a way that's not going to like fuck up my shit and make me too compressed? It's like keep your head very slightly looking on the horizon. Keep your stack. Now, some people they get a little crazy when they do stack, right? They like really bear down, and there might be a time and place where you do have to do that. But it's really important to not orient that way either. You don't want to go too far. But if you keep a decent stack and you keep your foot contacts, the inner heel, the inner first med head, and you keep your hand contacts, the outer palm and the inner part between your thumb and your index finger, that'll take care of 95%. And then literally you could do a 90-90 breathing on the wall. And that's like 95%. You don't have to dive any deeper than that for most people. There's benefits to it. But if all you want to do is like the bare minimum to feel good and like get rid of a little bit of compression, that's really all it takes.
Yeah.
And one thing about the older generation too, what they did is they just didn't live in extension. Like nowadays in bodybuilders, we're just fully extended. We're fully compressing that dorsal rostral area with everything we do. a lot of the 70s, 80s guys, sometimes they would use a pretty big range of motion, do certain things, but they would do that from like all directions. So why one thing's compressing, one thing's expanding. So in the end, they had a lot more balanced physique and a lot less overall compression. That's something that bodybuilders now we basically are just power lifters that do more volume, and so everything's in that brace extension position, and that's probably the worst thing.
Do you think the I don't want to say over reliance, maybe over reliance in a lot of cases because you have that whole concept of everybody wants to be doing the most stable fucking variation of an exercise out there possible because it's on paper the best for hypertrophy, sure, but that's like all they want to do now. Do you think there is some component of that where people are only using just machines, just chest support stuff that has a negative impact in terms of the compressive stuff? Because you say that, and I think a lot of these older golden era bodybuilders, like they did a lot of just bent over stuff. There wasn't a lot of those machines that they were really using, and a lot of them obviously looked the way that they did. And now you see a lot of guys like just pushing into that pad and then extending back up. And I would think that would have some negative repercussions.
As far as the actual machines, I think the main issue is it allows you to push more weight, and then you're going to be even more extended getting there versus like on a free weight version. But I don't know that is the biggest role in there. I would say it's for whatever reason, it's that the powerlifting community has just infiltrated the bodybuilding world as far as how to lift, and it's like maximum producing force does not equal maximum muscle. And I feel like the guys in the old days knew that. I mean, you didn't see anybody there who was, just braced real wide and getting on a squat. Like you look at Arnold and them squatting, they're narrow, they're going down to good depth, and they're keeping really good tension. So I don't know what really changed it. I mean, thinking about it, like I don't know what influenced the whole bodybuilding world to kind of change into that more like the more output is better. And it could be some of the machines just because it allows you, like I said, to just grit and push even further before you kind of get too wonky that you have to stop. But I don't know that the modern weights are as much. I mean, it is like you did have a lot more free weights then. So there's a lot more like managing and internal things. And if you manage that right, that can have a lot of good effects. And I feel like most of the guys back in the day were very kinesthetically aware. I mean, guys are now too, but they almost like ignore it. But I feel like the guys back then listened to their intuition, which people now don't, I guess,
Yeah.
because somebody with a PhD told them to do something some way, even though they look like shit. I don't get it. I don't know.
Yeah. Now everybody wants to, just do super low volume, low reps, super heavy weight, high frequency, only use the most stable machines, which I don't know if there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but I think it's like the things that come with that as a byproduct, which just results in people essentially ego lifting and like deviating from good execution. Cause you tell somebody to do a max sit at 3 reps, it's like to get to a weight where you could execute with like proper just intention and like not have some overcompensation happen with like a 3 rep load. It's like you have to really be in tune with yourself. And I think most people just end up just fucking swinging weight around. And I
Yeah,
don't think that's really benefiting anybody for hypertrophy.
no, yeah, that's a really good point that I always try to make too. Is like I said, I go to failure, but it's like, what does failure look like for me versus somebody else, right? So that's a really good example. Let's just say we're doing a press because that's the easiest one to demonstrate, right? Like when I'm getting to failure, for me, my failure is when I'm losing that ability to maintain the expansion that I want. And so for me, that's usually going to be like a rightward shift or something. Some people, they just start really extending. Some people pull down on their left. I mean, there's different compensations. It's really good to know what yours are though, so you can just be a little bit aware. But like my failures, as soon as I start to get that, I could crank out like 3 more if I got all fucked up and did it that way, and it starts dissipating. But I'm getting like less and less force on each one. So I'm real big on going to failure, but like technical failure or like mechanical failure. And then if you want to go past that, I like to cheat in a way that allows me to keep what I want, So maybe like not every move will facilitate it, but like I could do some flies. So I'm doing flies instead of getting all shitty at the end. Maybe I keep my stack and I just use my legs a little bit. Like you can go beyond failure if you can keep the integrity of your stack for sure.
So what do you said the biggest muscle groups you think are impacted by this whole compressive expansion thing would be like chest, back, and shoulders?
And probably quads to a certain degree. Now that you can get really good quads being super compressed. I mean, there's been tons of bodybuilders who've got great quads, but I would say like the pretty legs in general, like the especially the outer sweep, that can be really, especially the legs is almost more of an asymmetry thing, and lats are really asymmetrical too. I'm sure you've seen that. Like you look at
Hmm.
any bodybuilder do a front double, there's a good chance that left lat is going to be a little bit more prominent seen. I mean, that rib's going to flare more. It's going to present itself a little bit more. And then you look at a back double, you always see that right one kind of have a little different thickness around the bottom. Most people don't look symmetrical in their lats or their legs, and that's really heavily influenced by the pelvic and rib cage compression. You can build, like I said, awesome traps. You can build great biceps. I mean, even your arms, they do get affected, but there's such a single joint motion, you can work around that. But definitely pecs are so big because they're all wrapped around the rib cage. Lats, side delts, and to a certain degree, rear delts usually are pretty hard to develop. Usually what you'll see on these people who are super compressed is pretty good front delts because that's doing a lot of the pressing. They can build decent arms and they can get really great glutes, hamstrings, adductors, just the way they're set, and they usually use a big range of motion, but they also present with a fucking ugly gut a lot of times. And that's because of the way their body has to manage those internal forces when you get so compressed, like in your dorsal rostral area and your lower pelvis, and then these upper abs start to get really tight to bring you down. You're just push your guts forward and your viscera forward, and it is not that really attractive aesthetic look. And a lot of people don't think about how your aesthetics can be affected by it. And a lot of people say it can't, but it's like, this isn't like some stuff that's easy to like brainstorm and comprehend right away. Like you got to really dive in and just really let yourself learn all this like on the go. It's like a language. You got to get fully immersed in it because conceptually it can be pretty hard if you've never been exposed to any of this stuff to really grasp how it can impact not just pain. Like some people can kind of get the pain a little bit, but how it can actually impact the way you look aesthetically too. So you can
Hmm.
build good traps, good front delts, fucking great like erectors. You see these people with crazy erectors because they put everything through their low back, they put everything through their traps, but you're gonna be really missing pecs, good abs, good lats, and good 3D delts.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. It is very hard to really conceptualize if you don't really go diving into all these things. And something I've tried to really make clear because I'm putting out these videos and people they don't understand. It's like you're not going to understand from anything that I tell you in 90 seconds. Like
Yeah,
there's no way you're going to be able to comprehend this. And they, you got the whole science based committee who's like, oh, this stuff doesn't matter. You made this up. It's like I didn't make this up. And it's like, how are you going to call yourself science based and essentially disregard the fucking kinetic chain and then tell me to do 3 reps to minimize fatigue? It's like that's
yeah.
insane.
Well, we argue with the science-based community in the PT world just as much as people do in the fitness world. Because, like you talked about, like some of the PTs you've seen, like they probably would be like, well, there's no there's no RCT trials of how breathing in certain positions can affect this. And it's like, bro, like the best therapists in the world are doing this with the highest paid athletes in the world, like the smartest people. I've done it on myself. I've seen the changes. I work with clients every day. I mean, I work 35. I used to work 50 plus hours a week. I work 35 hours a week every week, and I get to test this shit on my people and see the real results like right away. Like I've had clients who like had like a guy who had a shoulder injury, AC joint, and it goes back to the positional injury. I said, he's like, I can never fly, like reverse fly at a certain point. And then you get that rib cage shift. They have access to a little bit more degrees of freedom. It's like, holy fuck, 15 years I've been dealing with this. And so there is a lot to it, but you do have to either dive in or almost like don't think about it and just think about, like I said, like keep your stack and maybe do a 90-90 and just don't go down that rabbit hole if it's too much, if it's overwhelming, if you're really neurotic. Unless you're dealing with a lot of pain, then I would say it's really worth going down there, even if you are really neurotic. But you don't have to. You can build a great physique. I like to know the why behind everything, and I feel like now I have a kind of a way to have a solution for almost every issue. It's very rare that I have to outsource something. Like I work
Yeah.
with great PTs, and I've had to outsource maybe 2 clients over the last 4 years since I've been really into this because it's really fun to problem solve using this. And you can problem solve for your pain. You can problem solve to get more tension on certain muscles by, again, like getting certain things to cooperate with you. A lot of times people are fighting their bodies, and that's because they might know what they want their body to do, but they can't get it. And if you get that little expansion, now what you've been thinking, like it'll click a little bit, you'll feel it a little bit better. So I do
Mhm.
think that it is complicated because there's not a lot of people in the bodybuilding space talk about it. It's more PT oriented. And I think I'm really one of the only ones who's really talking about it in this sphere because it is a little different as well. Like I work with a lot of clients who have worked with great PTs like Zach Couples and some others. And there's certain things that just don't click necessarily or work the best for bodybuilders who are at have so much muscle and so much compressive force. And like I work with Sergio a little bit, and certain things I do with him, like I do very different than they would recommend from like traditional ways because bodybuilder is a little bit different. What I found with a bodybuilder, if you again, most bodybuilders are pretty connected to their body. If you do give them a little bit of space to utilize, now they can get what they want through their movement. You just got to give them something to use. Whereas before, and with the general public, maybe I'd spend more time trying to get more space or open up more options, where someone who's really connected, they can utilize that little bit that you gave them, and they can drive more relative motion from there. And
Yeah.
it's a big rabbit hole, and it's tricky. The best thing, one of the biggest things too, is just breathe when you're working out. Like, make sure
I
you're
don't think
getting,
most people know how to breathe.
yeah, no, at all. I mean, and you can see it too. You'll see people going through their neck. It's really
Yeah.
easy to see, and you can feel now that you know like what you're doing. You can see when someone's
Mhm.
getting a good breath, and it's so different. Like if you're getting good breaths while you're working out, you're not just compressed the whole time. And something
Yeah.
else that I have you do, and that I have all my people do, and I do, is the alternating stuff, right? Like
Mhm.
a lot of bodybuilders might not ever want to do like an alternating press, right? I'm missing time under tension. I mean, I think you can do as much, if not more weight, but some people lower the weight a lot on there. But when you're doing an alternating press, or you're doing like an alternating leg movement, like that is giving you expansion while something's compressing. Like I have a guy I work with who's so bad. He's so compressed. Power lifter turned bodybuilder, and he just can't feel his pecs. And I had him doing alternating flies. And he's like, that's the first time I've ever felt it, because you can keep some integrity to that rib cage so much easier when you're just doing one side. So that's something, like
Yeah.
if you're looking for like the bare minimum, just ways to improve without having to get OCD, you can include some alternating presses. You can include some like different, like not just bilateral leg work, just split squats and things like that. Some walking lunges. Like so many bodybuilders just cut out walking lunges because they fucking suck at them and they're miserable.
Uh-huh.
They don't have any relative motion. But just doing that can really open up some space as well. So it doesn't all have to be like the super boring stuff. Like you need to do the breathing movements to get the space to access. But if you're really connected, you can do movements after that to get the rest of the space you need a lot of the time.
Yeah. I think what a lot of people are confused about is really, again, it just comes back because you need to understand so many pieces to really be able to put it together. And the thing is like with a lot of these people, especially with the whole science-based community, is like they want a piece of paper. They want, can you cite me a study that shows that ribcage compression is going to affect chest hypertrophy? It's like you can't do that. Like that's not possible to do. Like you're looking for something that it doesn't exist, and you just don't want to learn all the pieces behind it. But it's like with a lot of people now, I'll notice things, and honestly, I wouldn't know any of this. Don't think I would have ever known about any of this shit, or would have even cared about it if I didn't have my own issues, right? That's
Yeah,
like what led me into all this. And now that I have gone through all that, I have been able to realize the importance of it, which is great in a lot of aspects, but also just being able to see it in clients too. You see people, they're pointed all the way out here, and now they're missing a ton of development in their legs, and you go, why are you standing like that? Oh, it's just how I always stand. Like it's just how it's like no, you just have no idea how to use your feet, and this is so common among so many people. And it's like when you do that, and then you transfer that into training all the time, and this is just the way you are. That's going to affect what muscles overcompensate and get really hit the hardest, and then you're just going to go your whole life walking around saying I have shit quad genetics. It's like no, you just never learned how to use your feet, and that's why this stuff really matters.
yeah, definitely. From a bodybuilding perspective, that's usually how I have to get bodybuilders into it that aren't coming to me for like an injury. Like if they're just coming to me just to like train them, like I mentioned, I have to talk about the aesthetics component of it. But really, I'm still, the main reason I'm doing it is to give them more joint options and more availability, more degrees of freedom, more movement options is always a good thing. Not just for pain and injury, but just to get full development. Like it's hard to get a 3D look if you don't have a lot of access to a lot of tissues.
Mm-hmm. With the whole compression thing, lift AIC, right BC. Let's talk about that. Is that more so just a genetic thing, something that happens from environmental factors as you grow up, or is that something you think is more so, obviously like we said before, if you have shitty structure, that's going to just reinforce into training, and your training's going to be shittier. But is that something that you just get outside the gym from just the way that you are?
Yeah, like you're gonna skew one way or the other. So I'm tend to be a little bit more of like a narrow ISA, and so if you're more narrow, you tend to get a little bit more crooked than if you're wide. Like when I work with Sergio, he's like just the perfect example of just the widest ISA you can get. I mean, Sergio's so fucking wide that he's like the exact opposite of me. So he doesn't get like super crooked the way that I do. It's really everyone's individual strategy that they use to manage gravity and the internal forces and to move forward through space. So really, whatever your technique is to do that, you'll get the imbalances. Now, most people, we're always going to be a little bit on our right side. We're always going to kind of tend to orient that way a little bit. And so we've got to manage certain things. And the reason, the reason for that is, different things internally, your heart on one side, we got more lungs on one, the diaphragm's bigger on one. So there's just a lot of internal stuff going on. That's the same on everybody. The structure is a little different. The way you move through space is a little different. So that's why you can get a little bit different compensations. But once you start producing force, you're going to go into some pattern. So it just drives you in whatever you were kind of naturally even more. Like, and you know what I'm talking about. Like, you'll be in a car, we'll be right here, or you're just chilling, you're sitting there. You're going to carry that into the gym. You're going to see yourself start to kind of go down hard on that side. So usually the gym reinforces what you're already doing. Like, I got diagnosed with scoliosis when I was a kid, like 6 or 7 years old. I was just playing sports and doing things, and it wasn't lifting any weights. And then when I hurt my left knee, it really threw me on that right side, like way worse. And so then it just got worse. Like, if you have an injury, it tends to just skew you into whatever your compensatory pattern is, but like even more so. So you might see some like wonkiness on someone if someone like hurt their right leg and they're like really right dominant, like you might see some really weird curves trying to make up for not being able to put as much pressure on that right leg. But in general, you have a basis of compensation that you're going to use just way you move through life. And then once you add weight and start working out, that tends to it either makes it worse or it brings you into more of like what's called that pec pattern that we talk about, where maybe I'm not so asymmetrical. Now I've like closed off everything and I've got bilateral issues, which typically it actually is a little better to be a little asymmetrical. You don't want to be like super asymmetrical, but a little asymmetry is good. And that's something that people have to understand too, is like some people hear me talk and they think I'm like some like obsessive compulsive person. I want you to not have any sort of deviations on either side. Like you're going to have different, you need those just to walk and to like do things. Like if you had no asymmetry at all, that wouldn't be a good thing, but it's just a thing to manage. And it's like anything. People get obsessed and they like anytime there's anything new, it's like people are all about it and people fucking hate it. Like, why can't it be something to be aware of? And if you're really into it, dive deeper. And if you're not, just think about the bare minimum and that's cool. Like, it doesn't have to be something you hate. Like the people are also kind of like weirded out by things they don't know. I feel like a lot of people feel like they're missing out on something. And this is stuff that people haven't really heard about. Like, oh, I have never heard about this bullshit. But I think that's a big part of it too. People don't like to feel like I've been fucking things up for my whole life.
Yeah. A lot of people are getting mad. They're upset. They're, oh, this doesn't matter. It's all bullshit. It's the new terminology. It's like, the only reason I'm talking about this is because I've been lied to for fucking 10 years. I'm pissed off, and now I want you to understand it too. And maybe it's not that important to you, but it's just like, it's something cool to understand. Like you said, at the bare minimum, try to implement the stack when you're doing training and see how that helps you. Maybe you start feeling your chest significantly more, which so far I've seen everybody reply and fucking say, oh my God, I've never felt my chest as much. And, that has to mean something, right? Even me, I never fucking couldn't feel this pec at all. And just implementing some of the stuff, like I could feel this way more than I could, 6 weeks ago, right? It makes a massive difference. But, and then even like that's the bare minimum. And then if you notice, hey, I'm super asymmetrical, and you'll get into that rabbit hole. Like this is just a good introduction to do that, because I was asymmetrical for so long and none of these things have been brought to my attention. Like I said, I got scoliosis, so they said, oh, you're compressed. What does that mean? Then Eric Cressy was like, you have anterior compression. It's like, until I heard these things, I had no idea what fucking direction to even go into. But like now that you can start with that, it kind of brings you into a really good space to try to be able to figure this stuff out.
Yeah. And I wish Bill Hartman put himself out there more, because if you like, I'm like a meathead explaining this stuff. I'm 5 years deep in this, and I know how to do it pretty well and apply pretty well for what we need. But if you listen to someone like Bill Hartman explain this shit, you're not going to think this doesn't matter, this is pointless. You're going to be like, oh fuck, this guy just unlocked the keys to the universe. Because this whole expansion compression model, like if you want to dive really, really deep, it fucking takes account for quantum physics. It accounts for everything that impacts the physical world. It goes really, really deep. Like everything. Yeah. Like I've never seen a more comprehensive system, and that's why it's so hard to actually grasp. And also, that's one of the reasons why I like PRI. Why I'm glad I got into it first, because that is a system where they kind of give you a blueprint. Whereas the whole Bill Hartman side, it's like the wild. Like you just got to jump in and just get it. Like it's like you got to learn a language. You just got to totally jump in and get overwhelmed with it to hopefully come away with something. But if someone heard like him talk, and it'd be very hard for them to be like, this doesn't matter. The problem is you have us meatheads explaining things.
Yeah. I think a lot of people also get confused by, I at least know they have, when I've mentioned, you're rotated or shifted one way, and like, well, how can your ribcage be rotated? Well, how can your pelvis be rotated? I know you have the models there, so maybe this would be like a good time to really like put it into demonstration for for
Yeah.
them to visualize here.
Yeah,
Like,
I'll show you.
how can you be rotated and still move forward in space? I think is what they're confused by.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I sent you the other day, right? So most people they have that sacrum deviate a little to the right. So when that happens, like you can't just walk that direction. You got to move forward in space. So as that moves to the right, we have the left side ilium that starts to flare out, and then the right turns in. So you're kind of in that position. So your spine's pointing one way, but your pelvis is kind of adjusted to pull you forward. And usually you'll see a foot that's off, like your right foot might want to go in front of your left, or your right foot could be really turned out, or your left foot could be really turned out, depending on how you compensate. But these are very malleable. I mean, they don't move as much as I'm moving them. This is very exaggerated for demonstration, but your hips and your ribs and even your other bones, they all can move and change shape. So as that turns, these have to counter that, and then the femurs start to counter what's happening at the ilium. So you got a lot going on. Once this turns out, the femur turns out. So you're squatting, you're loading totally different muscles on each leg. And this is why you see a lot of people that just turn out their feet, because they have no other option to actually even lower themselves, because they don't have any internal rotation available. Then like on the rib cage, like again, that sternum's going to turn a little to the right. Again, I can't just have everything facing that direction. Something's going to counter that. So the actual sternum will go to the right while the rib cage tries to counter that and go to the left. So it's like, this is pulling me here, and this is going to pull me back that way so I can relatively get straight. So same thing. People think they're getting equal development while they're pressing in a bilateral move, but they're pressing what feels straight, but the ribs are going one way, the sternum's going this way. So it's very like not loaded the same. So it's big, and it's things that people feel. Like if you feel something in one shoulder and you don't feel in the other when you're pressing, like obviously something's going on. Like things aren't lined up exactly the same.
When you have that rotation in the pelvis, like in my scenario, I have like the levoscoliosis. Is that always going to happen? Is there always going to be some rotation or curvature in the spine with this, or not always?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about your like the S curve, the scoliosis, yeah, to a certain
like
degree.
with the left AIC.
Yeah, to a certain degree, especially if you're more of a narrow, you usually will see that. Again, people that work out really hard, they present a little differently because they kind of open up, even though they still are a little bit crooked. So not everyone's going to be like hard turned into the right side like me. Like I said, like Sergio or someone who's super wide, they tend to just dump. Like they'll really pull forward, and that kind of goes into the gut thing. So you could have somebody who is walking around really turned into here, and they're relatively upright. And then you could have somebody who's just pushed out of that, and now they're really forward, and there's still a very slight bias towards being right. But at that point, they're pretty much in no man's land. It's a lot better to have access to one side than to have no sides. So a lot of times when you bring somebody back, like you move their center of gravity back, because that's another big thing. Like everybody's like center of gravity is way forward. That's usually the first thing you got to do is you got to get them to sense their heels, and that'll help them pull their pelvis under the rib cage. Once you do that, then the asymmetries start to really reveal themselves. You get rid of those outer layer compensations. So someone might be walking around like this, someone might be walking around like this, which will never see, except for an acute situation, is somebody walking around like that. That is something that, I mean, I've been doing this for the PRI stuff for 6 years, 5 years, and I've never seen anyone in there other than an acute situation from like some weirdness. Like that one guy was there after skiing all weird, had an accident. So you're pretty much always gonna be the right, or you're gonna be overgrown a little forward. And in that case, it's really about bringing your gravity back. In this case, it's really about getting out of that right side.
So you said you never see somebody that would be considered a right AIC?
Well, if you were to have like a right AIC, like again, that can happen acutely. And so, I mean, in PRI, they say the only way that can ever happen is there's some disease where your organs get switched, and people don't live very long. I think they live to like 20. So I think those people have left AICs now. I'm sorry, right AICs. And now there might be some people who do that I'm not aware of for some reason, but like I said, I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years. I've never seen it. And PRI says it's like impossible. I don't know if it's impossible. They get a lot of shit for saying that. People swear they're in the right AIC, but I've never seen it. But maybe it's out there other than an acute situation.
Yeah. So what were you just saying? I lost my train of thought before that.
Well, we were talking about the center of gravity and how people can kind of push out of their right side if they're producing so much force.
That's right. So obviously there's a genetic component with everything, right? Some people could get away with murder, and they could have these problems and still develop fucking fine. Like I know I've said this. Somebody even mentioned, oh, well, Jay Cutler was fine. It's like, well, you're not fucking Jay Cutler. Like you don't have Jay Cutler's genetics.
But he still presented like that was his critique. I mean, you're probably young, you don't remember his all like when his reign, but everyone was like, man, why is his leg so asymmetrical? That was a huge kind of like detraction from him. Obviously, he's fucking got the crazy genetics. He's going to win the Mr. Olympia. It doesn't fucking matter, but
Yeah.
it still did impact his physique. And you could see in his lats. And if you listen to Jay talk, he was getting manual therapy weekly, multiple times weekly. And that was to counter all the shit he didn't know about this stuff. And so manual therapy can be like a band-aid. Or, I mean, if you have a really good manual therapist, you can make shape changes through manual therapy too, that lasts. But I get the feeling that wasn't what was going on with him. They would so when I guess this is a good topic to talk about the concentric orientation of muscles, right? So when your muscles are like at rest, if you have a good axial skeleton position, they're at like normal tension. As you get more compressed, certain things get more concentrically oriented, meaning they really want to produce force. They want to move you forward. Sometimes they're not good at it, but they're not really good at yielding to force at all. And then you have certain muscles that get eccentrically oriented, where it's kind of the opposite. They don't really produce force very good, but they can yield. And so once that happens, oh shit, backtrack. What started that?
Jay Cutler,
Okay, yeah,
asymmetrical.
right. So we have these concentric and eccentric muscles. And so it's like you can do some manual therapy on a concentric muscle that feels tight and you can get it to relax like a little bit. But if the axial skeleton's still in a position, you didn't do anything to change that, it's going to go back to that concentric orientation pretty fast. So what I think he was doing is he was getting soft tissue work pretty often on those concentric muscles, but not really changing the underlying issue. So that's why he had to do it so often. But that's also why he was able to be Mr. Olympia and put on so much muscle with these issues, because he was really taking care of it through that way. And again, I like manual therapy a lot, but I think it's much more effective once you've gotten rid of those concentric orientations of your muscles. So like your glutes, for a lot of people, glutes are for some people really concentrically oriented. They're really tight. They don't really yield to force whenever you're doing certain like hinges or doing like squats. You know, the weight wants to go forward. A lot of times you see concentric orientation on a lot of the like the neck musculature, but stuff that you don't really use. But in general, I would say like manual therapy can be a really good tool, but you really want to figure out why is something tight to begin with. And because I started as a manual therapist, and like that was the lens I looked at everything through. And I can feel a client's tissues, and then I can feel them. Like the old brain would be like, okay, I'm going to work on this, and there's a certain feeling you get after you work on it when it's not so tight or concentrically oriented. I can get that same feeling to the touch now by just repositioning things, and the muscles themselves, they're just not in a position where they have to be turned on so much. And it's the same result as if I were to do manual therapy, but now they like it's kind of fixed longer term until they fuck it up. But it's more the underlying root cause. So yeah, it doesn't matter for everybody. And you can still be Mr. Olympia, but even Mr. Olympia had kind of wonky legs and a weird lat.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do that in this industry. They try to mask everything with manual therapy, which is what I did for a long time. You know, I was told my sciatica was a byproduct of piriformis syndrome, and I got my glute hammered every fucking week for pain to just come back over and over. But I think a lot of bodybuilders, I don't know if I want to call them, is lazy the right term? Like they just don't want to do shit that's not bodybuilding. They'd rather just get tissue work than actually try to seek out
Well, I think a lot of it,
rehabilitation work.
like I said, a lot of it is you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean? People haven't been
Yeah.
exposed to everything, and then tissue work is such a common and easy thing, and it's great. There are some other benefits too. I do think, I think it helps with separation and definition potentially if you can get the fascia to not be so thick. This is something John Meadows would talk about too, like really bring out the details. So there's massage therapy is great, especially if you have a good therapist. Like if you have somebody who really knows what they do and they can create these shape changes. Like sometimes I can't get a person to change the shape that I need. They just can't do it. And I've got to go in there manually, whether it's they got scar tissue built up or they're just so disconnected or so compressed. So that's a great option. But I really want to address the underlying issues more than that. So I think it's more that they don't know. Because, like, I mean, not every bodybuilder is super coachable, but a lot of bodybuilders are really coachable, the pro level ones. And if they know this shit, they'll do it. Like, I got Sergio blowing out a fucking balloon every day. Like, he does this shit, you
The
know?
balloon helps. The balloon is the balloon's awesome.
Yeah, for some people, the balloon is a huge tool. And sometimes, there are different presentations where when we're talking about bringing your stack and balloon and exhaling, that is not the most beneficial, but that's not usually a presentation you see in bodybuilding. But, you can see the guys who are really close down, like here. Well, I don't necessarily need to have them thinking about stack. I may be thinking more low traps on that kind of presentation. But again, that's not the most common one you'll see in a high level bodybuilder, especially.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because you said there may be scenarios where you don't want to maintain that stack, and that just led me to think of movements where you necessarily wouldn't want to do that, right? Where you may want to deviate from having that stack, say in like in the decline press, or maybe like a dumbbell pullover or something of that nature. Why does that change? Why do you not want to maintain that stack anymore at that point? Why can you have more orientation?
Well, you're gonna get better leverage for your lats and certain things in certain positions with not as much of a stack. But the thing is, it's like even when you're not like stacked, the thing and like a stack, I would say a stack is even relative as well. It's like, are you like 100% stacked? Are you 90% stacked? Like I wouldn't say like there you are, that's a stack. Like okay, you look pretty stacked, but the biggest thing is just to not completely let go of intra-abdominal, intrathoracic pressure. So I do stuff with spine extension. Like if I'm going to do like a behind the neck press, I got to have some extension there. I'm not going to be able to stack and go there. I'm going to have to get some flare. And again, that is one of the things that does create bigger issues with me. But I still love my behind the neck presses. But what you want to do is you want to try to keep some intrathoracic pressure. That is the thing that's probably the most overlooked. Like some people like they engage their belly, but then they completely just let go of everything up here. Like if you're doing a pullover, like yeah, you can get some extension, but keep a little pressure intrathoracically between your shoulder blades. Don't let that completely compress right away. Maybe towards the end range, that's okay, but you don't have to necessarily be stacked for every movement. And especially if you connect to it. Like I can't talk about my muscle connection all the time and be like, well, if you do it that way and you feel it more, no, that's fucking wrong. Like as long as you have something on a little bit, because there are certain movements that you're going to feel a little bit better with a slight extension, like leaning into that way versus the stack. But again, it's all there's always like a range. It's like unless you have it completely turned off, that's the only time I would say like that's like really bad. Like you want to keep a little bit on. So especially as you go more overhead with your pressing or your lat movements and those points, like if you're doing a pullover, like I said, you don't want to stay stacked. Like that's gonna become a like a sternal fiber move, which I mean you could if that's what you want. You're gonna get a little more tries and probably some more pecs. But if you do let yourself go into that extension with some T spine, with some of that intrathoracic pressure, then you're going to get a lot more lats because you'll be able to get a little more leverage, a little bit more range of motion. But
You're saying intrathoracic pressure. What exactly is that? How does somebody achieve it?
so yeah, that's a tricky one. This is something that I think Zach talked about on my podcast with me, which was great. So you think about maybe it's easy to think about the area between your shoulder blades, that dorsal rostral area. That's an area that bodybuilders just tend to compress everything. Right? They press from there, they pull from there. Like everything they do is compressed right there. So it's really hard to maintain intrathoracic pressure right there. And all that is that's keeping your body from completely compressing here. So I can go through extension and I can keep a little abs on, but if I like get that good inhale where the ribs are down, and now I can feel that air pushing against the back, I can go into some pretty good extension and still maintain that pressure. So what I'll do a lot of times with somebody is like I'll just like put my fingers on both sides of their spine and be like, just push back into me. Don't move your body. Just push this rib cage back into me a little bit. So all it is kind of getting a little bit of air in that posterior rib cage and maintaining that integrity as you're going over, so we don't completely flare and squish together our shoulder blades. But it's something that a lot of people don't think about, and it's really easy to think about sometimes like on a press because you can feel your back against the bench and you can kind of connect to that. You can tell if you've really lost it. So that's a good way to kind of try to connect with it if you're having issues.
So you want to think of breathing into your back.
Yeah, that's breathing into it and then kind of maintain that as you're going, and on your inhales, kind of think about that's where it's going. Again, if you're able to keep, like I said, a little bit, again, you can hit extension without losing your ribs all the way. As long as you got a little bit there, it'll help a lot with the intrathoracic pressure. I mean, you can't get that intrathoracic pressure if you're flared and you can't get the air to go there. It's going to just go shoot straight up.
Yeah. What do you think about the concept of using dumbbell pullover specifically for the goal of expanding the rib cage?
Yeah, same thing. I'm just going to keep some degree of a little bit of intra-abdominal, intrathoracic on. I'm not going to completely turn that off. That's just me. I mean, maybe some people like to do that. And I'd say if you were to counter that with some like real extreme flexion, then that might work. You know, I'm not doing some crazy extreme Jefferson curls in my own programming. So I always like to keep a little bit on. You can get a huge rib cage expansion. And I personally think you're still going to get better actual expansion if you do have a little bit of that on. Like anytime you just completely let it go, and it tends to go through like one or two hinge points a little bit more. You want to kind of like spread that out a little bit. So in general, I would say it applies to everything. Keep something on in there. Don't completely let go of your abs. And it might be hard to think about your back. You can just think about just fighting like an immediate squeeze too. Like sometimes you keep that for as long as you can, and then maybe it'll come together. Like if I'm doing the pullover, really think about reaching away from the body, a little bit of ribs. I'm getting that flare, but there's still a difference between flaring those ribs and just letting everything go. So even then, I'm not a big fan of turning off the abs or the internal air pressure entirely, but you can definitely let it go pretty low down so you can get some pretty good extension.
Okay, so you do think that's a good movement for rib cage expansion? Because I know bodybuilders used to say that back in the day. They would use that.
I don't do it. No, I don't. I don't know. I don't think. I think they're just compressing posteriorly, really, and just flaring the ribs more than anything. I mean,
Yeah.
you could do it really. I mean, if I want to expand my ribs, I'm just going to do a hook line, kind of like what I sent you, with where I'm reaching overhead, and it also depends on like where am I expanding my ribs, because you have different parts of your rib cage gets expanded at different like arm reaches. So if you're doing like a full one, that can get like full expansion, but some people don't necessarily need full expansion. Like I've got some clients that are really like they have pectus excavatus, where they have the sunken in chest, super flared bucket handles. Like I need to pump air through a specific part of the rib cage, so I'm doing a specific reach for that. And so there is it does get a little bit complex when you get into it, but I'm not the biggest fan of trying to expand the rib cage through pullovers. I'm going to do it more through breathing movements where I can really focus on the breath. It's always, if you're doing any significant amount of weight, like it's going to be hard to really get the full breath to create a big expansion.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought, because you see them do it, and they have usually a lot of extension, and it just seems like a bunch of posterior compression. But I would also think maybe if you did them in the way where you kind of stay with your ribs more down, kind of like how you do it with like the alternating one.
Yeah,
Even if you did that with both hands, but you maintain that position and you just really focus on breathing, it's kind of like still like the same thing as like the hook line thing, but now you're just moving.
yeah.
I would think that would probably be better. No.
Yeah, same thing. Keeping a little of that, and I do like the alternating, because you do get that alternating expansion compression. That's one of my biggest warm ups. That'll improve some shoulder internal rotation. That'll improve like all the shoulder measurements right away. So I mean, that is going to expand the rib cage, because as one's kind of coming over, this one's here. You're getting that breath. This one ribs are really close down. You're going to get good upper pump handle expansion on here while you're getting lower on the left. So I really like the alternating ones. Again, most of the time when you see people doing these extreme flexions, it's hard for me to imagine you're getting a ton of expansion anywhere when you're so oriented that way. Like I don't think that's going to equate to a lot of ribcage expansion.
Yeah. No. I mean, well, I don't think I said this the other day, but I was going through it because I was trying to explain it to my friend, where you can even just stand here, right? You could like literally just stand here and arch your back and do all this and then try to inhale and expand, and you feel like you literally won't be able to
Yeah,
do
exactly.
anything remotely close compared to if you just sit here neutral, and you'll feel like the expansion happen. So I think a lot of people just confuse orientation with
Yeah,
expansion and think,
yeah,
oh, like I'm expanded here. You're not.
yeah. I mean,
You're just
a lot of times they're actually just squishing. They're just pushing up and squishing the whole thing front to back even.
uh-huh. And now they're missing this whole part of the action, which is something I've noticed with my chest too, right? Like I had this imbalance, and it's I guess maybe not that noticeable unless you know what you're looking for, but like you could feel it, right? It's like I could feel right here, like you said, to create an action across the entire muscle, you need to create expansion, and I could just feel in the middle specifically. There's much more density here than in the middle here, where there has not been all that compression, and I can't
Yeah,
fully
exactly.
expand.
Exactly. You're in that classic BC pattern where we got the right compression and the left compression. So yeah, that left pec all nice and full.
Yeah, but uh, what else did we touch on? There was the wide and fraternal angle. Why is there something? Do you think all these concepts equally apply depending on your infracenter ankle? Like the whole expansion compression thing is equally as good for both these individuals, or for one, it really just doesn't matter. Like we see with a lot of the wider guys, they could get away with a lot of shit. They could be compressed, and a lot of them still develop pretty fucking good chest doing it that way. But I would still want to believe that if they were to do it the opposite way, it would be somewhat better. No, or does it just not
Yeah.
matter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're compressed everywhere. So it's a little bit like they're trying to lose like anterior to posterior compression. They need to fill both ways. Whereas someone who's a little bit more asymmetrical, it's kind of like getting air in one part and getting air in the other part by kind of making certain muscles activated so it doesn't get air there. Whereas if you're like a wide ISA who's compressed, you can just go to your side and that can do a lot of good. So they still really benefit from it, because even if, I mean, they still get affected aesthetically for sure. I mean, there are definitely some people that press like shit that got decent pecs, but I still see a lot of wide ISA, like Sergio. I love, like, Sergio's my guy. He's got fucking crazy delts, crazy triceps. His chest is his weakest body part, and
Mm-hmm.
he's as compressed as you can fucking get. So
Yeah.
it definitely matters for wide people too, and especially for their ability to like have more movement options. Because typically, if you're wider, you end up getting more limited movement options because you get more bilaterally compressed, and so they're more likely to have like chronic like back issues just across the back, and they tend to be the ones that get like really like pinchy like hips in the one side. I mean, that can happen if you're really, really turned, but when you get really forward in space, like it just creates a little bit different issues. I see a lot more impingement issues on really wide than I do on narrow. I tend to see a lot more in general like neck stuff on wides versus narrows. If I do have a narrow who's got neck stuff, it tends to be more just asymmetrical and not as bad. So they have their own issues that they have to deal with, and it'll still help with their development a lot. Like Sergio's pecs are definitely coming up now that he's been able to like get some expansion and connect with them a lot more. So I think it's still just as important. I don't think it's any more or less. I think it's just different things that they're managing.
Okay, yeah, that makes
'Cause
sense.
you see a lot of wide guys. They still don't like they're wide up top from here, but they don't have the lats a lot of times if they're super compressed even. And it's weird because you'll see them have really good like back lat spreads where it looks like they do, but when they try to actually present it, they can't because they're so compressed in that front to back that it like goes down. They lose that width from the front on their lat spreads.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I've been getting asked a lot about ever since I talked about this was rib flare and the whole pectus. What is it, pectus of Axum or fucking? How do you fucking say it?
Excavatus, I think.
Excavatus. Yeah. So you've worked with people who have both of those, right?
Yeah.
And you've been able to make improvements in those scenarios.
Well, my one that I work with that is like, I mean, his is fucking really bad. I mean, I've had like more recreational athletes that have completely gotten rid of it. My one guy who I train 4 days a week, his is so bad. It's not going away, but it's gotten way better. And if you do have that, it's really you're in a super compensatory exhaled state. Like you don't need to exhale hard at all. You need to like exhale very soft, and you need to get long, long inhales through your nose. And you need to do a lot of like sideline stuff to help. But with people that have that, it's just so hard to not compress when they're pushing. They're going to end up just closing that down a little bit. So for those people, I do like exclusively alternating chest work, especially. And it's like when you're like that, probably don't want to be doing a lot of bilateral bench press. Like that's not going to be the best for that setup. Incline angles would be better if you did want to go bilateral, but in general, just alternating will be so huge for them and breathing on your side. And it sounds like silly, but people like this, they can't manage gravity at all and get air. And they actually get a lot of benefits from just hanging out in a pool and breathing in a pool. It sounds so silly, but that actually really helps a lot, get that expansion.
That'd be for both of those scenarios, the pectus and rib flare.
For the rib flare, are you talking about just like total rib flare?
Yeah, I mean that's just what I've been asked over and over.
Yeah,
How do I fix rib flare? Just compression cause rib flare, blah blah blah.
yeah. Compression will cause that, and that's a lot of that posterior rib cage. So if you're really flared at the ribs, usually what happens is you get posteriorly compressed first in that scenario. So that is going to be typically a little bit of a wider person. Usually the narrow people, we tend to get more compressed in the front at first. But again, there's such a degree. Like I'm not huge on doing the archetypes. I do because it is something. I don't want to completely ignore it, but I feel like in some contexts, people like overplay the archetypes a little bit, and especially in
Mm-hmm.
a bodybuilding context, because we all kind of end up very similar because we're doing similar stuff, even though we have a little different technique. But if you're somebody who's just got the really flared rib cage, chances are you're anteriorly posteriorly compressed at that point. But really, the root cause is because the posterior starts to really compress, and so this starts to flare up to kind of counter that to keep your center of gravity like upright. And so for them, what I usually have them do is those are the people that are going to benefit from the balloon work. Complete opposite of someone who's got the pectus excavatus where it's totally sunken in. They don't fucking touch a balloon. Don't do balloon work with them. But the
Mm-hmm.
really flared ribs, those are great people to do the balloon work with, because that's really the only way to train these muscles of the diaphragm to actually get the rib cage to drop to create the zone of apposition or whatever you want to call it, depending on what system you look at. Because it's really easy to use your abs to create that action. When you're using the balloon, it actually makes your diaphragm and your deeper abdominal muscles work. So they would benefit from that a lot. Whereas the other presentation, the sunken in ones, that's just a different form of compression. That's usually going to be a narrow. It's pretty rare to see a wide with that. You can, but almost everyone I've ever seen like that is going to be really narrow. And the narrows, like I said, they get closed down in the front at first. So that kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And so you say narrows typically have more of a tendency to become more anteriorly compressed, more asymmetrical. Wides would be more, typically you'll see more of that rib flare, more pec pattern type of issues.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So if you're more narrow and you're anteriorly compressed, that's going to take away your IR measurements. So usually these are people you see have got Pretty good ER, and this goes for the pelvis as well. Their pelvis is set up in a way that's to kind of promote ER versus IR. So you'll notice I have really bad IR measurements. If you're narrow and you've got shitty measurements all around, then you know you're front to back compressed, and you got to kind of work on everything. Kind of opposite for the wider. If you're really really wide, and you start losing those that you start getting some back compression, you're gonna start losing ER measurements, and that'll go for the hips as well.
Okay, so when we're talking about the hips, the pelvis, uh, what are the tendencies you commonly see in there? I would think, someone with a more narrow pelvis would be more prone to be like dumped forward. No.
No, I mean, again, it can. I have plenty of girls who are dumped forward that are narrow. So again, some of that comes to your strategy. But I say is more common is the narrow is going to be in that more counter nutated, the ER position where this sacrum is kind of upright and the ilium are kind of flared out a little bit. So that's just more ER bias. What I tend to see with that is we do get a little anterior tip, and it can go. I definitely have girls that have really big tips, but it seems to be, especially the more narrow you are, it's like a little tip and then really pushed forward. So these are the ones where they're almost pushed forward, and then their upper half is sometimes like behind their pelvis, and they kind of pull down to the front a little bit, not to the point where they get the excavatus or anything like that. But this is just way more geared toward producing ER. So these people have a hard time doing things that require IR, like hinges. Like they really want to turn every hinge into an ER. These are people that are going to squat really upright, and they might look really good when they squat. The opposite would be the wide, where the sacrum tends to tip forward, and then these iliums are more closed off. So these are more internal force producers, and they're the ones, you're already a little tip forward. They're the ones that tend to go down a little bit more than the narrows. But again, I see plenty of narrows that go down. I don't see a lot of wides who do the push forward, though. They tend to just kind of dump.
The wides would tend to dump forward.
Yeah, more than the narrows. Although it can happen in the narrows, I just don't see the opposite scenario that much. Like the Pink Panther, do you know what I'm talking about? You ever see that? It's usually like a small butt, and it's like push forward, and that's like my girls that are narrow. They fucking hate that. They're like, and like as I've gotten their posture a lot better, or gotten their pelvis to take a little better shape, like they do have more glute muscle, but they're also just presenting their ass better. So like a lot of girls think that they're working their glutes when they're doing certain things, but a lot of times they're not if their pelvis isn't cooperating with them.
Yeah. I would almost think that girls have somewhat more of a tendency to have. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of male athletes, but I just noticed with women, in many cases, they often tend to have that staggered stance with like the hand on the hip, and they stand like that. So I would think that would probably lead to issues in a lot of women.
Yeah. I mean, women do a lot of they have a lot of weird standing postures compared to guys. You know, the way they cross their legs and stuff like that. They can create
The heels.
Yeah, the heels really kind of like end up like a lot of times girls that wear in heels, they get really weird compensation, especially with the narrow, because it kind of like thrusts them forward when their natural tendency might be to kind of like go down and back. So yeah, girls, like especially where I'm at, these women, the fucking shoes they put their feet in, like makes a big impact. Like it fucking ruins your feet. So if you have shitty shoes and you're training, like it's gonna be hard to produce force the right way. So really important to make sure you got good shoes. Also, like that's something I have all my clients do is I give them the Huruska shoe clinic list, and we get some shoes that they can actually feel their arch and their contact points, because that's huge. You can have somebody set perfect, you get all their table tests good, and then they can walk off in shitty shoes and come back the next day and not do anything else, but just walk in those shoes, and it fucked everything up that you did.
Oh, so you said the Haruska.
Yeah, Huruska Shoe Clinic. It's from the PRI stuff, HRUSKA. Clinic.com, and they update the list every year, and they have like their favorites based off of do you have like a normal foot presentation, are you flatter, or are you higher mid arch. They also tell you kind of what to look for in general and what to avoid if you choose not to use a shoe from the list. But it's always like Brooks and New Balances. Those tend to be the big ones.
How do you feel about barefoot shoes?
For some people, like I use barefoot shoes and I love them. I use them every leg day. I don't really wear them any other time, but like I have some clients that have really what you would think of like early ER feet, where they're really really domed and they've got like no ability to connect their arch to the ground. So I definitely don't want them to have the barefoot shoes. And then I have some people that have like completely different stance positions on each side. Like we were talking about with the pelvis, if you've got one side that's really turned in and one side that's turned out, that's going to affect everything from the foot. So a lot of times you'll see people have like a left foot that has a little bit different shape than the right. Sometimes it's more pronated, it's a little flatter, and then on the right it could be more of like an ER representation, a little more domed. And so sometimes you have to get custom orthotics if you have a lot of issues and they're different on each side. So I have a couple of clients that I've had to do that with, and that has really helped. Like I got a client, she had an issue and she broke her foot, and like it was just so wonky. Ended up getting her different insoles, and then like the shit that I had to fix every like we go through the full week of training. By the end of the week, I'd have to go back and do the same shit. Now it's like once a month we have to do that kind of shit because she's got the right shoes.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean that's a whole process, but
Yeah, if you
if
can't feel your arch or your contact points, then probably don't wear the minimal shoes. But if you can, then I think they're good, and I do think they help potentially produce internal rotation force even because you have a little more of ability to get flat on there.
yeah, I mean I wear them all the time. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I can definitely feel those contact
Yeah,
points. And
if you're connecting with them, there's I think in general it's going to be not a bad thing. There's only a few foot presentations where I'd say that's like really not a good idea, but it's also something that some people might need to like ease into if they've never done it before too. Like some people like maybe don't put barefoot shoes on and squat 4 plates the first time you've done it.
yeah, no, definitely. Well, I think you mentioned something about people bracing their core. I think a lot again, like it comes back to a lot of people just don't know how to breathe, and you see that in a lot when people try to lift. Is they think bracing the core is I'm just flexing my core, right? And that's not correct, right? So how do you get people to really get in tune with breathing the proper, effective way using their diaphragm and transfer that into training?
You're getting ready for like a lift. So this is something that I always talk about with my people. I think we talked about this too. Is like you're right. Like, it's so easy to like bear down and get the ribs to come down, but now I'm in like weird flexion in my back. That's not, and my pelvis is in a weird position. It's compressed. Usually pull under a little bit. It's not what we want. So the easiest way to think about it is just to get like a long exhale. So if I'm going to do a squat, especially if you're something where you really need a good brace, I'm going to squat or deadlift. What you want to do is just get a good exhale, let those ribs drop, but don't lose any height. That can kind of be your cue on if you're orienting to get it. So you're just going to exhale. Those ribs go down, but you're not shrinking at all. And again, that's a skill. Like that's something I couldn't fucking do years ago. Like I couldn't
Mhm.
get my ribs to drop for shit. Like first time I felt that, I was like, oh, I was so excited because it took me like months. But when you get those to drop, so take a good inhale through the nose, you'll feel that thoracic pressure that I was talking about. And then from there, I would actually squat. If I'm squatting, I would go down with that inhaled breath, exhale on the way up. Depending on what I'm doing, how heavy it is, I might just inhale as I go down, or I might go ahead and re-inhale at the top. If I'm doing a hinge, because it's more IR bias than a squat, I tend to try to reset and inhale at the top every time. And that's something that I've been doing that's pretty new over the last year, but that has been feeling really good. And you can get in a cadence to where it's not like taking that much time away from tension when you're doing it. When it's light, I still do the inhales on the way down, but for something where you want, because your breathing affects your pelvis, right? So, I mean, again, I don't know how deep to go with this shit because it's so deep. But if I'm in an inhaled state or I'm taking in air, that's going to make your pelvis go into that kind of ER counter nutation, more of a narrow person bias. As I exhale, it's going to produce a little bit more IR force. You're going to have this tip forward a little bit, so you can kind of use that to your advantage. If you're somebody who's really done forward, you take a really good inhale before you go down. Now your pelvis is a little better space to squat. You've got more space to work with IR instead of having to like turn into an ER move or come up out of there before you get any real good depth.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it just plays such a big factor. I think it's one of the first things that people really should be taught going into training, but obviously that's never how it works out. You don't really figure this stuff out till much later. But you
It's like you
said,
said, right? There's so much. There's the floating heads on TikTok where these young kids are like influencing people. Where when I was coming up, it was forums and Arnold's book and shit. And so it's like there was a lot less misinformation, and the stuff that was out there was pretty good. Like you could actually learn on the forums pretty good because the good shit rose to the top. That's the one thing I kind of really miss about the old days is now there's like an information overload. So it's kind of understandable for somebody to see this that's never been exposed to be like, this is just more bullshit because they've probably seen so much bullshit.
yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of the stuff that was out has been like, the science-based community loves saying that like there was so much damage done, people were doing all this stuff, but I think they really. This is why I said I think this is one of the most valuable podcasts, and I think people should go and check out your stuff. And along with all the other names that we've mentioned, is because this stuff really does. I don't want people to overthink it, but it can play the foundation as to how you really develop. And this stuff, knowing how to stack, knowing how to breathe effectively matters much more than you trying to minimize fucking fatigue. Like all this stuff comes first. Like all these kids are worried. They're getting to their first 2 years of training and they're doing, 3 reps. I got to minimize fatigue. I got to do upper lower to, have the best frequency and you maximize hypertrophy. But at the core principles, they don't even know how to fucking execute movements or train. So it's like, this is the shit that actually matters first and foremost.
Totally. That's what I preach all the time. Like I fucking hate exercise science. Like I love everything about the body and knowing everything about it, but it's like we haven't advanced anything really in that sense in the last 30 years. It's like you get so obsessed, and this is something I talk about good old, like, he's always on these studies, but it's like, why don't we look at these biomechanics first? Because it's going to have way bigger of an impact. And you know, that's one of the other things about these studies. Like, if you're trying to do something where you're seeing what gets most activation, like me doing it the way I do it versus somebody doing it all fucked up, like it's gonna be totally different. You're gonna get totally skewed results. Like somebody who's got a totally different axial skeleton alignment, their range of motion is going to be totally different. Their optimal range of motion will be totally different than someone who knows how to keep a stack and produce force the right way. So I just throw all that shit out. Like, I tell all these kids, stop getting so OCD about this. Learn how to actually lift and keep tension where you want to, because you're going to look way better, but you're also not going to have any issues. It's like,
Hmm.
I was pretty lucky to be intuitive about the stack and like just make shit harder. Like that was when I was young. I was just like, I just want to make this weight as heavy as possible. I feel like that's a good thing. I don't really know why, but I think that really saved me from a lot of injuries. So the only thing I ever really dealt with is I had the left knee, but that was more running. Every now and then my left knee would get sore after a workout. I would get some neck stuff. I would pretty regularly get a back thing like every few months, but nothing like super bad, like kind of pretty good for a bodybuilder. Since I've been doing this over the last 5 years, I haven't had to I take that back. There was one time, but I was super dehydrated, partying in Vegas, and worked out the next, which was stupid. Like after driving all fucking day, I tweaked my back. But one time in the last 4 years that I've had anything that I had to mitigate my training for. And it's like so many people lose progress because they're either have to lower the intensity or have to take time off, not even account about like how it's going to affect your aesthetics, just being able to push the intensity and not have to worry. Okay, even subconsciously, if I'm really pushing some heavy weight, this is my max effort. Like, am I going to fuck myself up? Like, I never think that. I live with like no fear. I haven't had to nurse any injury in so long. And I think that, that is a really, really valuable thing as a bodybuilder.
I think the thing with these kids is it's really just more so of an ego thing and having to reduce weight to,
Yeah,
focus
because you do
on
got to
form
drop
first.
that load a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially like on leg. Like for me, luckily, I've been training chest pretty much the same way. I haven't had to change my chest training that much over the years. So it's like, I've gotten up to 4 plates. Well, 4 plates, I was a little more powerful, but not crazy powerful style. But I could rep 365 with pretty good form the way that I like. But what I know is like you still got to drop the weights. If you're just starting this, you got to drop that like 20-30%. And then for me, my quads over the last year, like I have really connected with the sweep by driving internal rotation when you're squatting and just trying to fight that counter rotation for as long as you can, keep that slight tip of the spine. And like I've had to drop that weight in half. I work with Justin Compton. He's doing my programming, and I'm like, I'm not doing any of this shit, bro. You have me doing fucking so many working sets. I'm fucking dead and sore for so many days. And that's the other thing. Like people talk about the mind muscle connection not meaning anything. It's like, okay, once I started doing these, my fucking muscles were so sore and they've all responded so good. Like my back and my quads have just blown up
Yeah.
over the last few years compared to what they did. And like I said, the quad stuff, especially, I had to drop so much weight on. So, I mean, what do you want to have an ego about? Like how much weight you're lifting in the gym around a couple dudes, or how you look naked when you're fucking girls or you're on the beach? It's
Uh,
like, come on.
it's the egos for the TikTok. And, I don't even, you'll see a lot of them try to make these points as to like, oh, well, remember when the gym pin didn't even fucking exist? And
Yeah.
everybody just used the stack that was on the machine or did more reps. And everybody was
Yeah.
fine. Everybody was fine. Everybody grew. Now all
I've never
these,
used a gym pin.
I never used one either. I have one in my bag. I've never used it. But all these kids got to stack up the fucking machine, put a 45 on it, have shit execution, and then they're like, oh, well, why do I listen to your bodybuilder when he's curling 35s? I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like, what are we saying here? It's just everybody has somehow
Curly 35 is shitty. Curly 35 isn't that bad.
apparently, I don't know, but everybody has taken principles of like just strength and powerlifting and somehow have infiltrated that into bodybuilding. Like bodybuilding was never ever about how much weight you can lift. Obviously, you will get stronger as you get bigger as a byproduct, but nobody like the amount of strength that these kids think you need to have and like the progression that they think needs to occur in order to maximize hypertrophy. It's like they prioritize one and ultimately end up trading off the other as a result of that.
Yeah, yeah. Progressive overload is a good thing to look at because again, yeah, people might like get a little bit more weight up, but do they, are they pressing from the same exoskeleton position? So this is something I talk about too. Is like I can actually feel like I've progressively overloaded, even if I got less reps than I did the week before. Like I was doing Smith squats the other day, and I haven't been doing them in a while. I did them a couple of weeks ago, and I think I had 3 1/4, and I was trying to hit 8, and I got to 8, but I got a little wonky the last two, and I was trying to fight it, and I just couldn't quite fight it, and I pretty much got to failure. And then the next week, I was able to keep my foot contact points way better and drive way more tension in my quads, and I fucking failed at 7, and I couldn't get to 8, but most people would say, "Oh, well, you did less weight, or you did the same weight with less reps. That wasn't progression." I was like, "But I kept the shape of my axial skeleton. I felt the muscles so much more, and I actually reached failure because of the muscle tension on what I wanted." So to me, that's progressive. And if you're just looking at weight, like that's a bad thing. Like, oh, that was a bad workout. When I was very happy with that because I connected way more. So I mean, I hate people that only, I hate the logbooks only going after that, because the weight should go up over time, but it's just going to happen on its own when things are right. Like, don't push it. Don't try to break your record every single day, because if you're doing that, you're definitely making some changes in your axial skeleton to get there.
I hate the logbook, and people always ask me why I don't logbook. I've done it numerous times, and every time I've done it, for one, I have always felt like it takes away from when like I'm training, because then I got to sit here, stop, and write down some shit, and it's just like it's like for what? And then also it's like you're constantly focused on you know beating this logbook, and it just takes away from like the ultimate intent of hypertrophy training. Like, yes, you should be moving up in a general direction, but it's like people overemphasize this shit so much, and it's really not that fucking important. Like, for the first 8 years I trained, I think I did different shit every time I fucking stepped into the gym. Like, and I just remembered, okay, like I could do 75s for like 8 reps. Like, that's it. It's like it's that important. Like, I don't need to have every single measurement tracked. I don't need to worry about if I'm going to deviate from doing an alternating dumbbell curl to a hammer curl next week. Like, it's not that fucking serious. And ultimately, as long as you're training with proper intent and going to failure, relatively close to failure, like
Exactly.
that's the primary thing. And people just focus on the numbers, and that's how I know I'm progressing. It's like that's not how you necessarily know you're progressing. That could be making your progress ultimately worse if that's all you're looking at.
Yeah, and you could be setting yourself up for having some issues with that movement or a different movement. A lot of times people maybe create compression during certain movements, and that can impact body parts they don't think about. Like, you see a lot of people who overdo these crazy rows when they're on the chest pad, and they're just peeling off way too much. Like, that's going to change the position of your pelvis, and maybe your knees all fucked up and you think it's from your squats, but it's really not from your squats. It's from the shape change that you created doing something stupid on your row. So I
Yeah.
mean, it impacts the whole thing. Like, the body it's pretty crazy. It's pretty complex. It's pretty unique, and everything has an impact on something else. And it is easy to get too into it in that way. It's like, okay, my foot's not having the largest impact in the world on my hand. It's going to have more of an impact on stuff closer to it, my knee and my pelvis. But even that hand, there's going to be some little impact.
Yeah, it is. Everything's intertwined. um I would say for the general population of people who are just into fitness, like the core principles are really just like learn how to breathe, learn how to execute movements effectively, and don't overthink it that much. But if
I would
you're
say I would say internal rotation is a thing that a lot of people don't like produce. When you have to be, if you're working out, you got to have internal rotation. So that would kind of go into the foot contacts and stuff like that. If you keep the foot contacts and you're aware, like, that'll probably take care of that as well.
I've noticed this very I've noticed this a lot over the past like couple of weeks. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I've been getting deeper and deeper into this. But I've had numerous people come to me and complain about knee pain and hip pain, and all of these people every single time lack internal rotation, and they're all like duck feet spread out, like
Yeah.
in every single scenario.
Yeah, that's pretty common. I mean, again, there's so much to it. Like, you're getting knee pain, but it's because your pelvis is all fucked up. Like from an FRC lens or a certain physical therapist, they're just going to look at the knee, and they're going to try to like get some tibia rotation, make sure you got good extension. But if we don't get internal rotation of the hip, you're not going to get internal rotation of the tibia. You're not going to get dorsiflexion of the foot or pronation, or dorsiflexion of the ankle, or pronation of the foot. So you got to look at it as a system. And so many people are missing IR. I mean, so many people, and that is very often the solution. It's not, like, obviously it's not always as easy to fall into patterns, but if you see someone's gotten like 0 IR in a table test, like, how are they producing force on a squat? Like, it's not coming from there. It's coming from something different. They're having some compensatory IR, or they're turning it into like an ER movement.
I've also seen someone say, this is a very well-known, respected person in the industry, which I will not name, but I want to see what your input is on the statement. Is that they were going through leg pattern movements, and they were extending rotated, like feet were pointed outwards, and they were basically saying, "Oh, well, this is issue," and they were like, "No, because the guy is so big that like his adductors, like he just needs space and like he has to rotate outwards, otherwise he's forcing it. So what do you think about that? Is that
Well,
necessarily true, or should
well,
that be an issue?
you gotta have the space to move into. If you don't have it and you're forcing it, you're gonna do something fucking weird.
Yeah,
So if you're one of these just duck feet power lifters, or the giant bodybuilder, I
with
can't
huge
really expect.
adductors.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, even I don't think the adductors are the big role in it. I mean, I don't think I can necessarily have you go totally narrow with your feet completely straight. If you don't have access to that, you don't have access to it. And so I try to like have them think about it, but don't compensate. Like I have a lot of people who I can't squat toes straight. They can't produce IR there. I have to have them go a little wider, a little turned out to get those foot contacts, right? Like if you're squatting and you can't get those foot contacts from a narrow stance, you got to do something to get that to actually produce. So some people just don't have the space or the access to do maybe what we want. So we got to get the best that we can, or we can create that space. I wouldn't say it's like because their adductors are so big. I mean, the reason their adductors are so big is because their pelvis is set in a certain way that the adductors take all their force. They take all their hip extension force instead of their glutes. So I think it's still a positional issue, but I wouldn't say like it's like a terrible thing if their feet are pointed out. If that's what they got to do, that's their only option.
Mm-hmm. So the main principles are more so keeping the foot contacts, not necessarily. Obviously, you want the foot to be as straight as possible,
Yeah,
but it's
work
really.
towards straight. You should build towards that. Yeah.
But the main thing is really just even if you can't get to there, as long as you can maintain those contacts, that's a priority.
Yeah, I've got some guys that I have squat with setups that I wouldn't want to squat with, but that's all they can do, and that's going to create more relative motion as well. Like if you have to go a little wider and turn out your feet to produce IR, that's going to be a lot better than being narrow and going to the outside and locking your pelvis up and putting it through your back.
And you mentioned the contact points here with your hand. What is that for?
It's kind of the same thing. It's easier to think about with your feet, right? Because you're always on the ground. But a lot of people ER their shoulders the way people ER their legs. You'll see, like, if you ever see somebody holding a dumbbell that's too fucking heavy for them, they shouldn't be doing it. It's kind of like tilted to the side. They don't have like that pressure here. It's like angled down a little bit. You know what I'm talking about? You ever seen that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that is turning your shoulder into an ER movement. Anytime we're producing force, you want to do it through an IR mechanism, and just keeping those contact points can really do that. And that actually helps so many people. I've actually I made a video. It was like Jeff Nippard was doing a bench press, and I kind of just corrected a few things, and I talked about the hand contacts, and I got like 6 messages from people like that actually like fixed my wrist or that fixed my elbow, just lining that up and producing force the right way. So that's a big one that I think a lot of people don't look at, and that's one of the big things we do with some of the breathing patterns is when we're on the hands, like really kind of producing that force through that area, because that's going to actually allow a little better expansion in your rib cage as well. And so that's something that I think a lot of people kind of leave on the table. Like they kind of grip things shitty
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard for them to grip it right because they don't have the right setup. But when you do things right and you breathe right, you can create more space. Like it's kind of like a trade-off. If you're working like max effort on something, I have a hard time imagining that's going to produce more space and expanse for you to move into. But on your warm-ups, or if you're going sub-maximal effort, the movement can definitely open up space for sure. And you got to have the hand contacts if you're working the upper body stuff to create that.
So you're trying to hold it here to help drive more internal rotation.
Yeah, you want equal pressure kind of here and there.
Here.
On the in between the thumb and the pink and the index finger, and then kind of on the outer palm below the pinky, but pretty low.
Okay.
And that'll help a lot with elbow stuff. I see a lot of people fix their elbow issues just by being aware of that.
Mm-hmm. And we keep saying that you want to use internal rotation when you're driving force. Why exactly is that? Why do we need internal rotation to drive force?
Well, it's how you produce it. Essentially, the way
Yeah.
you move through space. I mean, you can take an ER setup to try to move something from point A to point B, and you can move it with that representation, but it tends to just really go through, like I said, depending on what you do. Like if you're doing a deadlift and you're just picking something up off the ground, and you have your feet turned out, and you're in that externally oriented pelvis, and your weight's on the outer part of your feet. As soon as you bend down to pick it up, you've just lost all the relative motion in your pelvis, because it's kind of stuck that way. You have that lower compression. This is going to orient there. Your internal rotation is going to allow you to have the relative motion while you're producing force that we would like and drive the tension where we actually want. External rotation is kind of going to like dissipate it to places that we might not be optimal. I guess is a simple way to think about that. And I would say, especially for now, there are some movements that I do take an ER bias for, but it's usually for expansion purposes for like a warm up. Like I might have somebody do an ass to the ground squat on wedges with a goblet, and that's technically more of an ER representation at the bottom of that, depending on how you look at it. I mean, there's debates on this kind of shit too in this field, but I might have them do that to create expansion. But when it comes to actually building muscle, it's going to be more about producing force, which is going to be about driving that internal rotation, compression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is why you'll see people's knees cave, correct? On squats.
Yeah, that's a compensatory IR mechanism, and I mean, if you're like an elite Olympic lifter, you'll see that on their max effort lifts, but you usually won't see that on their lighter ones. Some people do that compensation, all of them, but that's your body trying to find a way to create that space. So it's not real IR; it's compensatory, and that is where people start to potentially get injuries like during the movement, like not necessarily like always after. If you produce a lot of compensatory IR and your body is not really built for that, then that's where we start getting a little tweaky, especially.
Now, you maintain these contact points when you're training back as well. And I say that because you've heard a lot of people say, when you're doing pull downs or something, if you want to biceps or lats, hold here and like lift this up and don't, you know what I'm talking about?
I've never heard that actually. No,
You
I
never
didn't
heard
know that.
that? Keep the pressure on your ring and pinky finger. And
No,
if you
I
want
did
more
not.
terries, I guess with more terries, rhomboid straps, that would be more internal rotation if you're maintaining those contact points, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
because you get into more there. So I guess it would be to externally rotate more. You wouldn't want that to, drive
Well, I
into
think
the
about the
lat.
contact. I think about the contact points on the rows as well, like not losing that. But I had Danny Lamartina. Do you know her? I had her on my podcast.
No.
She's a great physical therapist. She's a DPT. Follows the whole expansion compression model. She's also an IFBB Physique pro, so knows her shit. One of the only people who like Jack that knows their shit too. So I love talking to her. She knows her shit really good. But she told me what she cues, and I hadn't actually heard this, and I trust her completely. She was saying when you row, pull with the thumb and then let it go back with the index finger. And that kind of goes into what I'm saying, like keep it on that point. But that's something that she said that I played with a lot. And in general, if I just keep pressure there and don't lose that, it kind of does the same thing. But that's what she said, and I think that's useful.
Okay. Yeah, that is a good cue. What do you think about the use of straps?
I mean, the only I never use straps for any rowing movement unless I was to do, and I typically don't do that many. But if I was to do like a bent over barbell row, I probably would strap up. Other than that, I don't tend to strap. I did on my max sets before. I just maybe I'm better aligned. Like a lot of people's grip strength isn't just weak. It's again, it goes into the whole concentric eccentric muscle orientation. Like they're just not in a position to have good grip strength. Like now I've got so much better grip strength. I used to like be so fucked up like downstream, especially when I was doing a lot of manual therapy, that I had no grip strength at all. So I would use the straps, but the problem with the straps a lot of times is it allows you to lose those contact points and just start pulling kind of like funky. So I typically don't strap up except for deads or RDLs or barbell rows. I definitely don't recommend it unless you just can't move the weight
Mm-hmm.
at all. I honestly would probably, if it wasn't, if I could get like 5 or 6 reps, like without just dying, I would probably rather do that and rest, pause, and do a couple more than strap up on a pulling motion. And again, that's something that I've changed a lot. And I think a lot of people like this. One of the things like with like we talk about the bodybuilders in the old days, they had a lot of things that we don't, like forearms are one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they were like strapping up for everything like we do nowadays, like
Yeah.
immediately. And so I've also wanted to kind of develop my forearms through there. But I mean, I would, if I felt like I couldn't pull enough weight to get my back, I would just be aware of where my hand contact is and not let that go. But in general, I don't usually over recommend that much.
Yeah, that's a good point. I asked that because everybody really wants to rely on straps now, and I don't use them that much. I do use them if the weight's too heavy, but it is more so about maintaining those contact points. And a lot of people just use the strap as like a hook, and then they'll use
Yeah.
the argument, well, like the whole point of using the strap is to take your grip and your forearms out of it. It's like, do you really want to do that though? Because then
Yeah.
things could get a little wonky, like you said.
Yeah, I wouldn't because it does. It allows like too much variability and to not drive that IR force. And again, like these are all things like ever since I started doing all this and like no pain at all. I used to get elbow pain and shit, and I would when I was using straps and all kinds of stuff. So I do think it allows you to compensate in ways that you couldn't get away with if you didn't have the straps.
Yeah, yeah, and bring up the old guys is a good point because yeah, these guys had big forearms, they had great lats, and now we got fucking kids with the chest supported machine gym pinned with 2 plates on it, and they got fucking elbow wraps, the belt on, and straps on, and they're 160 pounds, and they're like, oh, this is the most optimal. It's like I think something's going wrong here.
Yeah, that's so weird. I don't understand the mentality to just write off the history of bodybuilding or all the best bodybuilders now because they're on juice. Like, does that make that makes just any shitty technique like work awesome? Like the axial fatigue overload and the maximum motor unit recruitment, like all this shit is like, come on, like
Yeah.
way overthinking, especially because there's so many beginners that are thinking about this, and
Hmm.
it's such a waste of time. And that's another thing that people can get really neurotic on is overthinking that shit. Like, how stable can I possibly be? And it's like there's some benefits to doing things not in the most stable environment too. Like, you don't always have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So let's close this off with I guess give me like 3 to 5 things you think would be the most crucial, important things to take away for these people to take into consideration when it comes to this whole compressive expansion thing. What should they be thinking about? What should they be looking for? Should they be overthinking it? What can they really do to maximize their training? Just what does it really take away from this?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about it, but I'll see if I can sum up a little better. So I would say, first of all, if you're having chronic pain, you have something that's you dealt with for years, and not saying something that's like so bad acute injury that you're just like fuck, something that's nagging. Like most bodybuilders have a nagging thing. That is most likely a positional issue of your rib cage or your pelvis that can be fixed, and then it could be something you never have to fucking think about again. And that is like such a relief when you get to that point and you realize, like, I just, like for me it'd be like I just ran 3 miles and I didn't even think about my knee. I didn't realize that was even possible. So if you do have a chronic issue, definitely look into the positional drills. I mean, I got a lot of them on my YouTube. You can check them out. You can check out, like you said, like I really like Zach Couples. He's probably my favorite that does what I do, because he doesn't dumb it down at all, but he presents it in a way that's easy to understand. I do think that there's some shortcomings just from the couple people I've worked with in terms of applying it to bodybuilders. There's some moves that they do that I fucking wouldn't do, but in general, he really puts out good stuff. So if you do have injuries, try to get into the positional drills that will help to fix that. Um, the easiest introduction, the one thing that I recommend everybody try, and if you have no hip flexion at all, then you can't try this. You got to do the hook line version. But if you've got decent hip flexion, then just do the 90-90 on the wall where you're reaching and you're just breathing, trying to get your pelvis to come down, come under your ribs to come down. Pull your pelvis up just a little bit and just hang out there. Just do that. And just doing that is going to give you a lot better alignment for everything. That might be all that you need to do potentially. I would say if you have like really underdeveloped areas that you can't connect to, then it might be worth looking to see if you're using technique that's overly compressive. So typically with the pecs, you're just squeezing the shit out of those shoulder blades. Think about, again, keeping the stack on everything that you do, unless it really requires a lot of extension, which most things the bodybuilder do does not require that much extension. So just keeping that stack, and then really not squeezing the shit out of your shoulder blades with a ton of extension. So even on like your back movements, like I see so many people get so much arch, like a little arch is really all you need. That's, spinal extension is not bringing your scapula together. That's actually taken away from that in range contraction. So the stack, not overly arching, overly squeezing on anything, the 90-90 positions. And then I would say, again, don't want to get super neurotic, but if you really dive into it, you really start to understand things that will carry over to like everything in movement. Like, you start to understand movement in a way that you can use your own intuition and your own reasoning to solve your own problems. And that's like the most valuable thing there is like for example, so I used to have like pretty asymmetrical abs, and that was something that really, really bothered me. And I was always, told or just figured that's something that I just can't fix. And then as I got into this, I was like, well, you know what? If I can change my rib and my pelvis position, I can probably make my abs look better lined up. And as I did that, and I was able to like, think about because I got the tools, I dove into it. I thought about what needed to happen to get them to line up. And now a lot more symmetrical abs. And I wouldn't have been able to get that if I just did the basic shit, if I didn't really dive in and get like really involved with it. So it is a lot, but if you dive into it, there are a lot of benefits beyond just not having injuries. You'll have big aesthetics. And again, the biggest thing, the way to make sure that you really aren't getting super overly compressed is to, again, keep your stack, good breaths, keep the contact points, incorporate some alternating or reciprocal movements and some different variations of leg work that's not just totally bilateral split squats and lunges and things like that.
Hmm. Those are all good points. I like how you brought that up about the abs. I think a lot of people with asymmetries just try to like take things straight on, and like you said, there's overcompensation patterns that happen, and you have to address things at the foundation, and
Yeah,
ultimately,
one thing I didn't mention at all that I think is super important is you need a KPI as well, like a key performance indicator to see that you're making improvements. Because again, if you're not having pain, it's kind of hard to tell, am I making something better? So you can check your range of motion. That can be a good check. But for bodybuilders, I usually like them to hit specific poses. Like for me, if I can't grab my left arm and do a side tricep, I know my rib cage is really shifted. So after I do some breathing exercises, some things that will shift it back, I can grab that totally fine. And the old me would have worked on internal rotation of that shoulder, thinking that's what I needed. No, I just had to reposition a few things. So you got to find something you can check to see if it's actually improving. That could be like a toe touch test. That could be a certain bodybuilding pose. That could be like anything that you can just recreate pretty easily. Especially if you do have pain, like doing something that like brings on the pain without it bringing it on. That's a really easy way to check it. But have some kind of performance indicator to see that you're actually making progress.
yeah, I mean the best ideal case would be to have somebody assess you and be able to look at you, that because I
Yeah.
mean really like when you're dealing with these things, it is very hard to look at yourself and really know what to look for, even if you get into all these nitty gritty details, like especially when you're like, even if you're not able to look at it, you're just going by how you feel, like your internal rotation, like it's very hard to make these judgments without an outside eye that really knows and understand these things.
Yeah, it's really worth, at least in the initially, like getting somebody who knows their shit. Because like, even if you think you know your shit, when you get with somebody who really knows their shit, you're like, oh fuck, I was doing so many things like not exactly right. So definitely try to like reach out to somebody who knows this stuff in the very beginning, at least in the like minimum, just so you can like you're going to be like wasting a little bit of time. Like it, like I had some really great mentors right away when I got into this shit. I was really lucky. I hit the ground running, but I've seen people like who didn't have the same support system I had that went to the same classes I did a year later, not doing shit that made any sense. That wasn't good at all. So definitely worth getting some help in person or online. That way you just know you're on the right path because it's fucking tricky and it's nuanced. And that's why like I do a lot of people online, but the best is always in person because it's like you know you came out here. It's there's so many little things, especially once I see in person that I can't always see on the screen that can make a really big difference. And it was also a benefit to feeling in range, like range of motion that you can't do here. Like you can tell if something's a hard stop because it's a bony blockage, and then okay, well now I know that I actually got to shift something so that bone's not blocking, or if you're feeling it, you can see it's more of a spongy stop. It's more of a soft tissue thing. You can't really get that feel from just watching, but definitely get some help if you've never been introduced to this because this you can't do this just on your own, like reading and watching videos. You need somebody at least a little bit to walk you through it.
Yeah, no, I've been, like I said, I've been pointing everybody in your direction and other people's directions who have been commenting this stuff and saying, they have this problem, or they feel like they're internally rotated here or compressed here, and I can only point them to.
Bodybuilders are easy, by the way. Sorry, but it's like if you have pain as a bodybuilder, you're fucking up because we're not doing anything crazy. We're in a controlled environment. We're not even doing like heavy like 1 rep maxes. I mean, most bodybuilders are not going to go below 5 reps on something. We really have no excuse to be dealing with pain at all.
Yeah. No, but I mean, just in terms of like the asymmetries, or like how I have like the shoulder dysfunction just from like in my postural issues to begin with. People ask me these things, I point them in your direction, but ultimately, like I don't know if you work with people just online and you just take them on. Like I came out to see you first, but I keep telling people like I imagine that, and with from what I know, like I know I definitely wouldn't be able to do anything just by looking at somebody online. Like you need to see somebody in person because things are always different in person, and be able to see how they move and all that stuff. And then you could transfer on to like working with them online stuff. But really, like I think a lot of these people need to find somebody in person if they are dealing with these issues, to have somebody assess them and go through all that stuff.
Yeah, I work with a lot of people. Not a lot. I mean, I have I work in person so much, so I have like a roster of people I can plug in anytime I want. Most of them have been exposed to it to some degree and had that in person, or they've been out to see me, so it is like really helpful for them. A couple of them have never been exposed to anything, and we're able to make some really good changes. Some of them, it's just like I mean, it's almost like you're not connected. There's no point to do it online. like
Yeah.
like some people, there's no benefit at all, and like I just need to see them in person. Like I felt bad. There's probably been like maybe like 2 or 3 times out of maybe like 50 where I'm just like, this person's so fucking disconnected from everything. Like
Yeah.
I can't do anything.
Yeah.
So usually you can get something done online, but it's always better in person.
Yeah, I mean, you're still disconnected. Like, there's only so much you can convey to somebody. It's like, well, what do you mean use my fucking inner foot? What do you mean breathe into my diaphragm? It's like, like you have to like just being able to guide somebody is so much easier. It gets done so
Dude,
much faster.
I spent like 20 minutes trying to get this hockey player. I'm working with this pro hockey player to get his right hip to drop on the right glute max, and trying to convey to get that to go towards the wall. I just couldn't. I mean, there's a little bit of a language barrier too. I'm like, fuck, okay, we spent 20 minutes on that. I really need you to do this, but fuck it, whatever. We'll go to something else.
Yeah. So, where can people reach you if they want to, get in
Um,
contact or find your stuff or any of that good stuff?
Well, I'm really mainly on YouTube, but I'm on IG. People can DM me there. It's Jay Warren Fit. I don't have like a ton of time to do a lot of stuff, but I always try to sprinkle it in when I can. I'm really putting a lot of effort into YouTube. I'm going to try to make that grow this year. And I've put in a lot of stuff. If you kind of like were to watch it sequentially, it'd probably be beneficial because I kind of cover more of the basic stuff. Now, some people will jump in and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I see some of the comments like, go back a little bit and like watch some of the older stuff and it'll make more sense. So my YouTube, just search my name, Jonathan Warren, and then J Warren Fit on Instagram.
Okay. And you're based in California, right?
Yeah, SoCal, Newport Beach, the paradise of the U.S. I would not
Yeah.
live anywhere else.
Are you taking on people if anybody's down there?
I take like I mean, I've had a lot of people fly out, which is interesting, right? Because I'm not huge on YouTube. I got like 6 or 7 thousand. I don't have much on Instagram, but it's such a niche that has so much value to the people that actually realize it. That I've had a lot of people fly out, and I always try to make time for that. And a lot of people that's driving in from San Diego, Santa Barbara, and LA. So I mean, I don't have like I couldn't take like a full time person, but I can always take somebody who's coming out for like the weekend or something.
Yeah, I mean, you're very niche. So, somebody like myself who's dealing with those issues and comes across, you're like, holy shit, bodybuilder that understands this, need to go see him now. That's it. Like,
Yeah.
there's nobody else that could do it, right? Like, I go see all these other people. They give me stuff insightful, but it's like you're not bodybuilding. Like, how do I
Yeah,
integrate this?
the biggest thing exactly is doing it in the weight room because I see some of these guys who've seen some great therapists and then it just falls apart when they go to the weight room because like they just don't translate it. They do all their stuff good and then they fuck it up. So yeah, hopefully I'm trying to be that link between the PT room and the weight room.
Yeah. Well, I have that video. I have a video that we filmed of everything, but I'm gonna have to do commentary over it because I watched it back and I was like, if I just post this, nobody's gonna know what the fuck is going on or what
Yeah,
we're even talking about. It's just
yeah.
like so candid.
That's what I did with the Sergio video I did where we trained. I had to like voiceover because like this isn't gonna make any sense. So again, it is a lot. Like if you're really just introduced to this and none of it makes sense, check out Zach Couples. I like his stuff a lot. Connor's got good stuff. He does have to like change things up a little bit to get it out to the masses, but for bodybuilders, his stuff is totally fine. I really like his. And then Danny LaMartina, who I mentioned, she has some great stuff. She's really good at like getting you to fix your issues or manage your issues while you're still doing work. She's really big on not stopping work to fix that. So those are all guys and girls that are really, really good at this as well.
All right, awesome. Well, check him out, guys. Check out Jonathan. Thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man.
And we'll see you on the next episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding. Peace out.
Awesome. Take it easy, brother.